In a world where players and monsters reign, the team was resting after an intense battle and preparing for a new raid. The silence did not last long. Suddenly, a vibration was heard underfoot, quickly increasing in intensity with each passing moment. It grew louder and louder until a giant creature, like a serpent from the deep sea, emerged from the shadows. It was not just a monster, but a cursed sea serpent that was not destined to become a dragon because of a terrible spell. Everything seemed to freeze, but the team of fighters immediately rallied, taking up fighting positions without hesitation. Among them were only the best. Each had rich experience, extraordinary strength and skills honed to a shine. Raiden, the central figure of this story, also stood among them. Although he was a level 1, he was not weak. Despite his modest stats, his strength was abnormal. He smashed the monster with one blow. He was 27. But just 3 years ago, he was an ordinary student facing obstacles. His father was struck by a rare disease, mana deficiency, which began to mow down people after the opening of portals. 19 years ago, gates to other dimensions appeared, changing the very essence of human existence. People began to awaken, gaining magical powers and entering a brutal game of survival. Monsters brought in huge profits, especially after selling trophies, called loot. Players became rich. But this luxury was unattainable for Raiden. He had only one goal: to save his father's life. The medicine that could alleviate his condition was incredibly expensive and extremely rare in the world. The mother worked 2 grueling jobs, and the older sister sacrificed the money she had saved for the wedding. Even that wasn't enough. Raiden had to work on construction to help. He often imagined himself tearing down concrete walls with his bare hands, or jumping across rooftops like a real superhero. But this remained a dream. After all, awakening was, in essence, a lottery. The chance of winning was minimal. Tired, he returned home, took a shower, and was about to go to bed, overcome with despair and fatigue. But at that very moment, a system window appeared before his eyes, informing him of his unexpected awakening. The joy quickly gave way to confusion. All of his characteristics were below standard values. His level was first, and his strength, endurance, and magic were not even up to the beginner's minimum. Such an awakening almost guaranteed public disdain. Players were judged on their strength and usefulness in combat. There were classes: tanks held enemies, damage dealers destroyed, healers healed, and boosters supported. Some, like Hannah, were awakening for the second time. There were fewer than 10 of them in the world, only 1 in Korea. Even those who couldn't level up usually had at least 1 active or passive magic ability. And Raiden had only one thing: access to the skill store, which looked strange, but hid big secrets. Among the skills, there were those that had rare or even legendary quality, but cost exorbitant amounts. He got 2 billion points, but to buy even the cheapest skill he needed 10. He decided to look for at least something that could help his father, and came across an amazing elixir. To raise the necessary funds, he turned to trading. It seemed the only way out in his situation. Having found the amazing product, Raiden bought several units and received a magical crystal of amazing nature. After absorbing it, he felt his strength increase slightly. The indicator only went up by 1, but it was a sign. Inspired, he bought a large batch of crystals and decided to see if he could make money from it. The next day, he went to the Players Association to officially register himself as a newcomer. The woman behind the counter was confused, her gaze filled with doubt, as awakening at such an age was rare. Raiden didn't immediately understand her reaction until he looked at his reflection in the mirror in the hallway. His appearance changed. He looked much older, which further confused all thoughts and hopes. Raiden sat down on his chair, feeling confused as he couldn't understand what was going on around him. When I opened the status window, I noticed something alarming. His screws started disappearing at an incredible speed. After a few minutes of analysis, he realized age is directly related to earnings. The balance maintains youth. Not wanting to turn into an old man, he decided to take action, to sell things that had at least some value. The first thing he picked up was a gaming device, an old console he once held as a childhood memory. Raiden held it up to the system window and watched as it disappeared, dissolving into the air of the room. But a moment later, the item appeared in the trading system, where he independently set a price for it to sell. In a distant world, amidst a dark sky and demonic towers, a woman with wings and horns monitored the market. Upon hearing about the update, she immediately decided to buy up all the new lots, not being too excited about their appearance. At the moment of purchasing the same console, Raiden became younger again, as if someone had turned back time by years. Another inhabitant of another universe joined the bidding. She was attracted by the unusual objects from Earth. She looked at the smartphone with interest, tried to unlock it, and came across an image of Raiden. This amazed her. She saw herself in the mirror of the device and began to take pictures with human masks. The demonic woman, having received the game console, immediately turned it on and quickly figured out the basic functions. Amazed by the technology, she went into the game while Raiden thought about what else could be put out. He later tried to add someone else's item for sale, and the system rejected the request. He returned to honest trading, filled out the section, and waited, hoping that someone would be interested in the new product. The next morning, there was not a single purchase. The reason was the inflated price and low quality of the items. Customers started sending in complaints. One woman wrote that her smartphone only worked for 6 hours. Raiden realized that to them, these things were magical artifacts, and without instructions, they were difficult to understand. Soon the trading system temporarily blocked his access to sales for the next 3 days. If the problem is not resolved within a week, the blocking will last for another 3 months. Raiden was shocked. This could ruin his entire plan to make money, and he couldn't afford such a mistake. An idea popped into my head to visit a website with used equipment and buy a smartphone with a charger. He chose an inexpensive, reliable, and well-known model, which he planned to send to the complainant. At first, I wanted to buy 10 units for future use so that I would have something to replace the defective ones with. However, there were not enough funds left in the account, and this made him think about new ways to earn money. Raiden remembered the skill book he had been keeping in a stash for a long time, but selling it required player status. Because of his aged appearance, he was never registered, which made the matter even more complicated. But, looking at the phone screen, he realized that the moment had come to change the situation in his favor. The guy put on his jacket, took a deep breath, and resolutely headed for the door, without hesitating for a second. In order to earn some money, Raiden temporarily returned to construction, hoping to patch up his financial situation. The 3rd day passed, and the system finally lifted the block. He again gained access to his own trading panel. The guy was delighted, intending to quickly get back to business. But before he could even update the lots, a glitch occurred. Complaints started coming in again, even though he didn't have time to add new products. The system immediately blocked the account. Raiden didn't argue, accepted the situation, and headed back to his part-time job so as not to waste time. 3 more days of hard work allowed him to prepare a new list of things and complete the update to the system. This time, everything worked out. I processed all the requests, eliminated the shortcomings, and restored the trust of the buyers. Its rating stabilized, negative reviews disappeared, and its reputation began to grow again in the eyes of consumers. Pleased with the result, he decided not to delay the official registration any longer and headed to the association. To become a player, one had to undergo compulsory training, which lasted for 3 weeks without a break. The classes explained the basics of survival, how classes work, combat tactics, and how to use item mana. Despite being tired, Raiden completed all assignments, studied diligently, and did not miss a single class during the course. After this, he had to pass an exam, theoretical and practical, under the supervision of the association's instructors. He passed the test on his first try, which pleasantly surprised not only himself, but even some of his mentors. The very next morning, the guy received the status of an official player and finally had the right to participate in raids. Immediately after this, he decided to take the equipment, but the funds he had were only enough for old things. I had to rent used armor and a worn-out sword, but there was no other choice at the time. The weapon, although it had scratches, was sharp enough to leave no chance for the small monsters. Raiden approached the main gate, where groups of hunters were already lining up, looking for tanks and healers. The demand for support was huge. So many expected to find a team even before entering the dungeon. But Raiden decided not to rush into joining the group. He wanted to test his strength alone. Passing through the gate, he found himself in a hunting area where a real fight was raging. The battle unfolded before the boy's eyes. A team of newcomers tried to resist the local beast. It was a horned rabbit, and despite its funny appearance, the creature attacked with wild speed and incredible strength. The players could barely stand on their feet, and some were already retreating, unable to withstand the onslaught of the unexpectedly strong monster. Raiden looked at the situation and felt doubt. Perhaps he really had rushed in with the intention of hunting himself. But he wasn't going to back down. This day was his chance to prove that he was worthy of being called a player. Raiden rushed towards the horned rabbit without hesitating for a moment, and within 8 minutes, the battle was over. The monster lay motionless, and the hero didn't have a scratch. The victory came surprisingly easily and almost without effort. Without wasting any time, he decided to move on, and noticed security personnel patrolling nearby. To avoid unnecessary questions and to avoid getting into trouble, Raiden immediately activated stealth mode. He merged with the shadow and walked past cautiously, leaving no trace, unnoticed even by the experienced. In the very center of the dungeon, the Sioux Guild operated, an organized, strong, and well-equipped group of professionals. The team was led by Alice, a confident and determined leader who knew exactly what she wanted and how to achieve it. They were looking for a specific loot, the head of a rabbit boss, which was a rare and incredibly powerful enemy. Despite a thorough search, the monster could not be found, and the guild began to lose patience and resources. It was at this moment that Raiden emerged from the shadows, calm and unharmed, which immediately caused a wave of surprise. His appearance was contrary to expectations. No trace of fatigue, scratches, or even labored breathing. The guild members began to whisper, trying to figure out who he was and how he had gotten so far away alone. Without explaining anything, Raiden joined the fight. His movements were precise, light, and surprisingly harmonious. Every blow he struck had a purpose, every leap had a rhythm, and even his opponents seemed enchanted by this technique. Alice watched silently, analyzing his every movement and gradually coming to an unexpected conclusion. She remembered the 20-level rule. If the player's level is lower than the monster's, a reward can be received. But if the difference is too great, the reward disappears and the effort is wasted without bringing any benefit. Suddenly she realized that in front of her stood a newcomer who had just begun his journey, and this was his first real hunt. Meanwhile, Raiden continued to fight, dealing with the monsters one after another without any sign of fatigue. From each victory, he received amazing crystals, magical stones that had great value on the market. But despite all his efforts, his level remained unchanged, as if the system refused to recognize him. This was worrying. Newbies usually progress rapidly, gaining levels almost every hour. The increase in stats at the beginning is a normal thing, but here there was a strange, unnatural delay. Raiden decided not to stop, realizing that only activity could provide answers to all questions. Time passed. He hunted for another 5 hours without a break, giving his all in each fight. But nothing changed. The level still remained at 1, which began to frighten and confuse. Something was clearly wrong. The system was broken, or his nature was completely different from other players. A feeling of anxiety began to creep into his soul, and although he was calm on the outside, anxiety was growing inside. After 10 days in the hunting zone, Raiden had almost lost faith in progress, despite his impressive achievements. He earned more points than he needed to buy the skill, but his level still stubbornly remained at the first mark. The monsters emerged from the shadows by surprise, but the hero dealt with them instantly, destroying the threat with one blow. Cutting off heads with the precision of a surgeon, he gradually destroyed 300 opponents in the form of horned rabbits. The system finally recognized his success. Raiden received the title of Horned Rabbit Hunter, which increased his strength. This title could develop further if the number of victories increases, which gave motivation not to stop. He once destroyed 3 monsters at once, in one assassination attempt, stunning nearby spectators. Among them was Alice, the leader of Team 1 of the Sioux Guild, who decided to intervene after seeing his extraordinary skills. With her was Jessica, her assistant, who was the first to initiate conversation and explain the cover-up situation. Their group also worked in the shadows, not wanting to attract the attention of outsiders or informants from other factions. Jessica was genuinely fascinated by Raiden's fighting abilities and couldn't help but ask him his current level. The question caught the hero by surprise because his level still hadn't increased, although he had already fought more than 100 battles. Embarrassed, he answered briefly, trying to change the subject. But Alice was already carefully analyzing the situation. She introduced herself as the leader of Team 1 of the Sioux Guild and offered to join them. The organization needed people like him. Noting that the guild could help with development, she expressed a sincere desire to support his path. Raiden appreciated the offer, but, given his own goals, decided not to commit to any structure for now. He politely declined, explaining that he was now seeking to remain independent and develop on his own. Alice didn't insist. Instead, she handed him her business card and suggested that he contact her if necessary. To avoid conflict, she advised leaving the dungeon with their team as a group of allies. But Raiden declined the offer. It was easier for him to move alone, without extra eyes and restrictions. He moved deeper into the area, avoiding the crowd and focusing on the task that was not yet complete. Only after some time did he finally emerge through the gate, already tired, but with a baggage of new trophies. Nearby, he noticed several strangers suspiciously examining the area and whispering something among themselves. The wary Raiden didn't waste any time. He quickly got into the nearest taxi without looking back at those people. He did not give the driver the address, but simply asked him to drive ahead in order to escape pursuit as quickly as possible. After much thought, Raiden finally decided on a goal. The Blood Fox dungeon became his new direction. The driver who was taking him to the gate recalled an old story, but the hero did not listen. His thoughts were spinning around the barrier. The main thing that worried him was whether they would let him in, since the system still did not recognize the increase in level. The atmosphere at the entrance was reminiscent of previous portals. The usual tension, rows of guards, the noise of players. Despite this, access was granted. The barrier did not work, and Raiden passed through without unnecessary delays. He took no chances, and, like last time, instantly activated cover mode to remain invisible. Blending into the shadows, he walked past the guards, leaving no hint of his presence in the area. Once inside, Raiden immediately began the hunt, acting methodically, purposefully, and without delay. His target was the Blood Foxes, aggressive creatures that attacked in groups and had razor-sharp fangs. The hero wielded his weapon confidently, deftly cutting off heads without wasting energy on unnecessary movements or emotions. Only 2 hours had passed, and there were already more than 300 destroyed monsters lying around, all covered in red mola. The system recognized his achievement. He received the title of Blood Fox Hunter and increased his strength. However, he did not stop there. The thirst for results and the need for resources drove him ever further forward. It was the 7th time of continuous struggle. Every movement was honed to automatism. Every blow became more accurate. By this point, he had already destroyed over 1,000 foxes, which brought him a new rank and an increase in characteristics. Its power grew gradually, but noticeably. The system finally began to respond to efforts and efforts. The crystals that fell from the monsters gathered in whole handfuls. Each of them had its own weight and value. Going deeper, Raiden came across a secret place where a skill book lay, covered in dust and an aura of power. He didn't think long. He quickly assessed the artifact and decided that it would be a good product for sale. Having put the loot into his inventory, he headed towards the exit, not wasting time on unnecessary delays or research. Once outside, Raiden went to the trading post, where they usually exchanged trophies for money or other resources. His appearance caused a wave of surprise. It's not every day that they bring so many crystals and rare magic books. The exchanger checked the authenticity of the items several times before he admitted that he was dealing with a serious hunter. Having received the long-awaited reward for the resources sold, Raiden decided to have a snack and rest a little after the trip. His body needed energy because the previous days had been exhausting. Each fight took more and more strength and concentration. After a short break, he went hunting again, not wanting to slow down and lose his fighting spirit. This time, luck smiled on him. The system assigned a new rank, superior in level to all previous ones. It was a heroic rank title that no other famous player in their region had ever received before. Along with it, all characteristics increased by 20 units, which was immediately felt in every movement. The speed increased, the blows became stronger, and the endurance allowed to stay in fighting shape longer. But despite the breakthrough, Raiden's body could no longer withstand it. Every muscle ached, and his eyes begged for rest. Realizing that he had reached his limit, he headed to the nearest motel to finally allow himself a few hours of sleep. The room was simple, without any extra amenities, but in the peace and quiet, he was able to fully restore his energy. 10 days of continuous work and more raids passed. He returned to the hunting area every day. And now, the system reacted again. This time he received a title of a legendary level, even higher than the previous one. His stats immediately increased by 60 points. This was unheard of even among the oldest players. The strength and agility felt like a completely different person. He became much faster, more stable, and more accurate. However, he had completely exhausted the boundaries of this zone. There was no longer a single title left to be obtained. To develop further, it was necessary to go to other places. Only new portals opened up new opportunities. Raiden understood this well, so the next morning he began preparing for a new journey through the next gate. After another hunt that lasted until the evening, Raiden went to a familiar motel, looking for peace and quiet. After his shower, he received a message. The system reported the funds that had accumulated at the auction. The amount was too large, and therefore the transfer was only permitted by personal visit to the exchange office. Without wasting time, he immediately went to the specified point and successfully received his money that same day. As he was walking out into the street, he accidentally stopped at a shop window and looked at his own reflection in the glass of the bus stop. His thoughts instantly returned home to his mother and sister, who lived modestly after their father's death. He recalled that since then, the family had bought almost nothing new, choosing only the bare necessities of life. His heart sank with guilt, and Raiden decided to immediately go to his mother to see her for at least a few minutes. As he boarded the bus, he felt a slight sense of excitement. For the first time in a long time, he was not returning empty-handed. When I arrived at my mother's place of work, she was just finishing her shift and was rushing to her second night job. Raiden met her at the service entrance, tired but smiling as always despite her obvious fatigue. He invited her to have dinner together, but his mother was forced to refuse due to her busy schedule and limited time. Then he offered to at least walk her home, not wanting to lose this short moment of closeness and care. At first she hesitated, but finally agreed, realizing that her son just wanted to be close for a little while. They walked along familiar streets, illuminated by night lanterns, in an atmosphere of quiet autumn silence. On the way, Raiden decided to share the news that he had kept to himself for so long, not daring to say out loud. Gathering his courage, he told his mother about his awakening, an event that changed his whole life beyond recognition. His voice trembled a little, but every word was sincere. Each one vibrated with the hope that the family so lacked. The mother stopped a few steps, silently looking at her son, and a slight spark of surprise and alarm flashed in her eyes. Raiden carefully pulled out his player ID from his pocket and handed it to his mother, allowing her to see the truth with her own eyes. Looking at the document, she couldn't hold back her tears. Emotions overwhelmed her, making her sob in surprise. At first, the mother began to apologize for the life that she could not give him before. But a moment later, her voice changed. Now every word was filled with gratitude, joy, and aching pride. Raiden assured her that everything would change now. Hard nights and double work would be a thing of the past, forever. To confirm what he said, he showed a check with the indicated amount. It looked unreal, like from another life. The mother was momentarily stunned, not believing that so much money could be earned not in years, but in a matter of days. Despite everything, they still went together to her work. The habit of responsibility did not let her go so easily. There, Raiden tried to help everyone who needed help. He carried, brought, cleaned, without a word. His movements were confident, but there was a sense of sincerity in each of them. It was not a show, but a real manifestation of care. After finishing their shift, they headed home, tired but filled with a new warmth and sense of closeness. They were met at the apartment by Hannah, their sister, who did not expect to see her brother that night and froze in amazement. Her eyes widened when she saw that her mother had not come alone, but with Raiden, like in the past. The hero did not wait long and shared with her the same news that changed the life of their entire family. After listening to her brother, Hannah couldn't hold back her tears. Her shoulders shook, and her cheeks were covered with tears of relief. In the silence that reigned, words were no longer needed. Hearts said everything that they had not managed to say out loud over the years. Together they spent a warm evening, simple, homely, but so dear after all the difficulties they had experienced. Soon, everyone went to bed. Fatigue washed over them like a wave, but for the first time in a long time, sleep was truly calm. The next morning, Raiden got up early. Not wanting to waste a minute, he gathered his gear and left the house. He promised his mother that he would be back before she came home from work. For the first time, she could count on him. His steps were sure, his heart filled with purpose. Now he hunted not only for himself, but for them as well. The day began as usual, but circumstances quickly changed. Raiden did not have time to return by the time his mother arrived. Long traffic jams clogged the roads, forcing him to sit on the bus and look at his watch with a feeling of anxiety in his chest. When he finally arrived, the mother was already standing at the entrance, worried and confused, looking for her son with her eyes. Her anxiety was understandable. The memory of losses and worries about loved ones still lived in her heart. After a short explanation, they went together to the hospital, where their shared pain remained a shadow. In the intensive care unit, under the light of the lamps, the father lay on the bed, motionless, tied to an IV. The mother's gaze clouded over again, but she held on, clutching the hand of the man who remained in a coma. Raiden spent the next few days in the Horned Rabbit Zone. Dozens of battles, hundreds of victories, and the title of legendary rank. Having gained strength and feeling that it was time for the next step, he decided to go to a new battle zone. The gate leading to the vampire bat's territory required at least a level 10 clearance to enter. These monsters lived in packs, attacked en masse, and did not forgive weakness, so they were some of the most dangerous. Raiden activated cover, hiding his level and presence to pass through the guards undetected. Having passed through the portal, he immediately moved into the depths of the location, where, according to rumors, the strongest vampire beasts nested. Finding himself in a space with a grayish fog, the hero created a magic shield around himself, preparing for battle. To attract the creature's attention, he deliberately cut his finger, allowing the scent of blood to fill the air. It worked instantly. Flocks of bats flew away in the distance and began to quickly gather in Raiden's direction. In response, he concentrated his power, simultaneously activating the fireball, although it was done with great difficulty. Maintaining two skills at once was not easy, but with experience and concentration, the flames grew stronger. When the power reached its critical limit, Raiden released it. The bullet roared through the fog and disappeared into the distance. The bats continued to attack, and the hero destroyed them, receiving the title. The smell of burning filled the air, and when the fog cleared, a lost sword gleamed among the ashes on the ground. That sword was the only thing that remained after the explosion, as a reward for the risk and uncompromising attitude. Picking up the sword from the ground, Raiden immediately felt an unusual power. The artifact allowed him to restore mana and stamina. Its characteristics were striking, and the hero decided that finding a few more similar things would be very useful. He remembered the rule. By destroying many normal rank monsters at once, you can get a rare item. This pattern prompted him to test whether it also worked for higher class creatures with more complex skills. For a week, he purposefully exterminated rare rank monsters by combining strategies and powers. Despite all efforts, not a single relic dropped out. No weapons, no armor, no other valuable finds. Raiden began to doubt whether the mechanism worked with those monsters when suddenly everything changed. After another battle, a robe was found among the loot, a rare item associated with vampire bats. Its effects were exceptional, and the hero realized that his efforts were not in vain. He just needed time. Having secured new things, he decided to temporarily put off the battles and devote his attention to everyday affairs. Together with their mother, they visited a real estate agency, where they chose a home that was better than what they had before. The choice was not easy, but Raiden wanted each family member to have their own room and space for themselves. A week later, the family had already moved into a new house, where a cozy atmosphere and a feeling of home reigned. The evening calm filled the kitchen with the aromas of dinner as everyone gathered at the table in full force. Hannah, sensing the warm atmosphere, suggested making friends with the neighbors by treating them to a homemade pie. Her idea was simple but sincere, and everyone supported it. The family learned to enjoy simple things again. The next morning, Raiden set out to hunt again, not wanting to lose momentum after the short break. His target this time was the gate leading to the location with blood-red mice, fast and aggressive. As soon as he stepped there, he immediately ran into a pack. The attack was instantaneous, but did not take him by surprise. Using a combination of sword strikes and fire bombs, he quickly destroyed enemies, leaving behind piles of crystals. Having collected a huge amount of resources, Raiden did not hesitate and took everything to the exchange, planning new purchases. But on the way to the exchanger, he was met by a familiar figure, Alice, who had already officially introduced herself for the second time. A week ago, when Alice first told Guildmaster Su about Raiden, the situation got out of hand. Jin, who ran the organization, was furious to learn that the hero had refused the offer without a second thought. Without wasting any time, he ordered that Raiden be convinced to join the guild at any cost, no matter the method. To carry out the task, he enlisted the help of Cedric, a man known in narrow circles as a specialist in negotiations and pressure. Alice was given clear instructions to cooperate with him in order to conduct a second attempt to recruit the hero. The guild already had some data. They learned that Raiden had repeatedly sold rare crystals. This led them to suspect that the hero had a unique ability that ignored the 20-level rule. Such a gift was considered extremely rare, and the guild could not afford to lose such a person. When Raiden came into range, Alice and Cedric immediately went to meet him. During the conversation, the hero immediately showed a reluctance to cooperate and made it clear that he was not interested in their guild. However, Cedric hinted more harshly, even cautiously recalling the possibility of a personal visit to his house. The mention seemed like a veiled threat, and Raiden immediately became wary without showing it outwardly. Despite everything, the three of them sat down in a nearby cafe. The atmosphere was tense, although outwardly it looked ordinary. Cedric immediately announced the conditions. If he joined the guild, Raiden would receive 1 billion as a salary. In addition, he was promised an advance of less than 10 billion to quickly close the deal. Such generous offers amazed even experienced players, not to mention the cautious Raiden. He found it hard to believe that his skills could be of such great value to outsiders. His intuition told him that the offer concealed something more than a simple interest in power. To finally join the guild, he was required to open the status window and show all abilities. For Raiden, this was unacceptable. Such data could become a weapon in the hands of those who could not be trusted. Suspecting an ulterior motive, he made a logical assumption. Their target was not him, but something related to resources. He directly recalled the number of crystals he had managed to collect to test the reaction of his interlocutors. Alice's demeanor changed instantly. Her silence confirmed that this topic was their real goal. Left without an answer, Raiden decided to act boldly. He deliberately named a deposit of 100 billion. No more, no less. His condition was simple. Only after receiving this amount would he agree to demonstrate the status window. He understood that no one would agree to this, and such a sum would immediately eliminate any further pressure or blackmail. When the atmosphere in the cafe finally became tense, the hero stood up and left the establishment without hesitation, in complete silence. The realization that he was being watched through the crystals made him more careful in future exchanges and operations. Suddenly the phone rang, and without waiting, Raiden looked at the screen. It was Cedric. Without hesitation, the hero immediately hung up, not wanting another conversation. When I got home, I received a new message also from Cedric, but I decided not to even open it. A few seconds later, he blocked the sender, trying to protect himself from any connections with this guild. After that, I went on another raid, deciding to focus on what would bring real benefit. However, the very next evening, returning from hunting, he again saw Cedric on the road nearby. Not paying attention, Raiden walked past silently, without saying a word, as if he hadn't seen it at all. The next day, the hero set out on a new task, hunting lizards, which required a lot of effort. However, after long battles, he managed to collect the required number of points to purchase the desired elixir. Now he could afford to continue exploring new portals, including one dangerous one. This time, his target was a dungeon in which lived a red-furred wolf, a much stronger creature. The monster was no less furious than the previous one, but Raiden was ready to meet it in direct combat. At the same time, in another dungeon, a player named Khan, who had reached level 71, encountered something unusual. Before him appeared a creature that looked like a giant panther with 3 heads, with fangs the size of a man. While he was thinking about how to react, the beast was already devouring his comrade right before his eyes. An attempt to use the staff to fight ended fatally. In an instant, he lost his arm, and when he turned around to run away, he didn't even have time to take a few steps before one of the heads cut off his neck. With each passing day, Raiden continued to hunt tirelessly, not stopping even in front of the most dangerous monsters. The gates were packed with players, as demand for hunting had increased significantly after a decade of abnormal cataclysms. Over the past 10 years, the number of portals has been constantly growing, forcing people to constantly adapt to changes. This continued until the first heroic class portal appeared, when the growth suddenly stopped. The world froze in tension. No one knew what would happen next, but stability lasted much longer than expected. Meanwhile, Raiden managed to find an empty area and began methodically destroying the wolves that came his way. Every battle was easy for him, and the monsters didn't have time to do anything before they fell from his decisive blows. Having received the next rank, he collected all the dropped crystals, carefully hiding them in a bag with strong protection. The hero then set off in search of a new corner suitable for hunting, hoping to find at least a little silence. But all the locations were already occupied by players who had occupied strategic places earlier and did not plan to leave them. Not wanting to disturb the others, Raiden decided to change direction and head towards another gate that had not yet been explored. But before he had time to leave the territory, he heard terrible and desperate screams from the opposite side. Looking back, he saw the players running away in panic, scattering in all directions, not paying attention to anything. They were pursued by a giant beast with 3 heads, like a hellish creature that came out of their worst nightmares. The monster acted mercilessly. It was enough to meet his gaze, and the victim would instantly lose his chance to live. One of the girls, who did not have time to run away, died instantly. Her severed head was thrown several meters to the side. The monster soon approached Raiden and launched a swift attack, trying to grab him in one fell swoop. However, thanks to his instant reaction and survival instincts, the hero managed to dodge at the last moment, saving his life. His heart was pounding madly, but his body remained calm. He knew that the time for panic was long gone. Now he had to act. After attempting to activate stealth mode, Raiden quickly realized that the skill provided no advantage. Even out of line of sight, the monster delivered a powerful blow, shattering his protective gear. The armor cracked under the force, and pieces of metal flew in different directions, almost injuring the hero himself. Having no choice, he rushed into the attack, wanting to see if his fire would have any effect on this beast. But all efforts were in vain. Even the most powerful techniques did not cause significant harm to the monster with 3 heads. Raiden used his firebomb skills to try and slow down his enemy just enough to escape, but even the flames that incinerated other monsters did not stop him. It only made the creature even more angry. The monster rushed forward with a roar, tearing the ground with its claws and looming over the hero in complete madness. Raiden knew that time was against him and began to maneuver around obstacles and try to buy minutes. At the same time, he was intensely searching for a way to increase his chances, preferably at least some temporary accelerating effect. Everything around him merged into a continuous ribbon of movement until he remembered the pill that once increased his agility. After accepting it, Raiden continued to run, waiting for the moment when the effect would finally be absorbed by his body. 20 minutes of continuous fighting and movement passed before he felt a new lightness in his legs. Then the hero stopped for a moment, gathered all his magic in one point, and created a powerful fireball in front of him. Focusing on one of the monster's heads, he fired a bullet with such force that it tore the target in half. The creature roared again, and Raiden didn't stop. He quickly directed the next blow straight into the paw, piercing it. It seemed he had finally gained the advantage, and suddenly the monster's body began to undergo terrible changes. Before our eyes, the regeneration process began. The torn head was restored, and the broken parts returned to their place. Raiden froze for a moment, realizing that he was dealing with a creature capable of completely healing itself during combat. Realizing that victory was still too far away, Raiden once again rushed in the direction of escape, passing by the debris of rocks and the remains of the battle. Trying to buy himself some time, he looked at the system window and came across an offer. A fire spear at auction. Without a second's hesitation, he spent some of the points and instantly received the weapon in his hands, squeezing it with hope. The power of this spear was felt immediately. The heat from it glowed, as if a red-hot core was beating in the center of the metal. Focusing all his strength, he lunged forward and threw the spear straight at one of the monster's heads. The flames tore through the target, sending chunks of molten flesh flying in all directions, leaving only ash. The monster howled, shifted, and began to dodge, preventing Raiden from getting close to the rest of the vulnerable areas. But after a few precise moments, the hero managed to neutralize another head, leaving only the third. He already felt tired in his arms, sweat was running down his face, but it was impossible to stop. Time was going against him. Suddenly, a warning message flickered on the screen. The level of lies had dropped critically, and the reserves were exhausted. Without access to magical energy, the only option was to buy time, giving the body a chance for partial recovery. He began to move in a circle, dodging the beast's attacks while simultaneously protecting himself from becoming overly exhausted. Meanwhile, deep underground, guards arrived at the site of the last signal, where they discovered evidence of a terrible massacre. Mutilated bodies, dark pools of blood, and powerful paw prints were evidence of the emergence of a real nightmare. An argument began within the group. Some wanted to follow the trail, while others demanded an immediate retreat for safety's sake. While they argued among themselves, Raiden continued to circle, looking for the moment for the decisive blow. He later noticed that the monster's regeneration was no longer as active. The damage remained on the surface. It was an approaching sign. We needed to attack while the monster was still vulnerable and had not fully recovered. Gritting his teeth, he gathered the last of his strength, focused his gaze, and prepared for the one throw on which his life depended. The monster suddenly jerked to the side, dodging the spear, and again escaped defeat at the last moment. Raiden didn't stop. The tension didn't subside, his movements only became more precise, and his blows more decisive. During his next attack, he managed to leave a noticeable scar baked from the heat on his opponent's body. Instead of pressing further, he hit the monster's leg, causing it to lose its balance and direction. Taking advantage of the moment, the hero rushed into the enemy's rear, aiming where the defense was weakest and most vulnerable. Without wasting any time, the spear pierced the monster through and through, going deep into one of its heads, all the way to the base of its neck. But the beast, breaking its last breath, struck with its paw and threw Raiden back, breaking the wooden shield. The hero rolled on the ground, inhaling dust and a metallic taste in his mouth, and immediately stood up, clutching his weapon. Looking at his opponent, he noticed that the heads had partially recovered. Time was against him. There was no point in going on the defensive anymore. The fight had to be finished before the monster fully recovered. Gathering his last strength, he rushed forward and with one precise movement cut off the front paw. Moving without stopping, he rose above the body of the beast, and with a new attempt, reached all three heads simultaneously. The fiery blade tore through the monster's body, and its last breath melted into the air along with its voice. Silence fell over the battlefield, and only the earth breathed nearby. The victory was complete and final. Suddenly, the system sent a message about a new rank for destroying a three-headed monster of an enemy rank. It was a named Hailstone, a creature of a rare level, whose appearance in itself was already a big event in the region. But it didn't end there, because the system immediately added another rank for victory, despite the advantage of levels. The hero had not yet had time to comprehend what he had seen, when instead of the monster's body, a mysterious object appeared on the ground. It was a book that the system identified as an artifact of immortality, a rare skill. Her description was astonishing. She allowed one to survive almost any battle, except for the complete destruction of the head. In addition, she activated the ability to quickly heal even the most severe combat wounds. Things like this don't just appear out of nowhere. The artifact was unique, the only one in the world, and it made you think. Raiden looked at the book carefully, then decided that there was no point in delaying. It needed to be activated immediately. Once the effect took effect on him, the wounds began to heal and the muscles began to fill with vital energy again. Every touch of air was no longer a peak, the pain weakened, and the usual combat focus appeared in the eyes again. Along with the new skill, the hero revised his titles, which also significantly increased his characteristics. After assessing the increase in strength, agility, and endurance, he realized that he should temporarily end this raid. He turned around and slowly walked towards the exit, trying to comprehend everything that had just happened to him. At this time, a team from the Players Association had already gathered at the gate to the dungeon, having arrived at the call of the guards. They were led by a woman named Yuna, and their goal was to assess the threat after the appearance of a high-level monster. The team immediately ordered everyone to leave the area, as the first cases of player deaths had already been confirmed. One of the team members touched the ground, applied the scan, and transmitted the result to the rest of the group. According to him, there is no high-level monster in the zone anymore, but there are still some in the dungeon. This information surprised everyone present, because, according to the data, only one player remained inside. In just a few moments, a group of high-level fighters came straight to the place where Raiden was. They approached almost simultaneously, bombarding him with questions about whether he had seen the terrible monster. The young woman stepped forward and, without hesitation, handed the hero a potion to heal serious wounds. Having accepted the help, Raiden thanked him briefly, hiding his fatigue and trying to look calm. After a short pause, he described the creature, but deliberately indicated the wrong direction of its flight. His words left no doubt, and the team immediately moved deeper along the route he had indicated. They moved quickly and in a coordinated manner, trying not to lose any details of the underground terrain. Having walked around almost the entire dungeon, the group came across only an old portal in a dead end. After several checks, they assumed that the monster had disappeared because of him, leaving the zone. Without wasting any time, the fighters reported the discovery to the main office of the Players Association in the capital. They then discussed possible escape routes for the monster that might have used the portal. During the conversation, the question arose whether the hero survived the battle and left the dungeon alive. And although everyone was already returning, Yuna stayed behind, apparently wanting to check it out for herself. The young girl stayed away, ordering the team to wait for her nearby, because she was still worried about one player. She couldn't shake the feeling that he could be left inside on his own, and needed help right now. Without hesitation, she moved deeper into the dungeon, exploring the familiar passages step by step. She gradually reached the very gates, but did not find any trace of the player on her way. At the same time, Raiden returned home to at least rest a little after the battles and stress. He tried the potion he had received earlier and was pleasantly surprised by its effectiveness in healing wounds. Just as he was about to lie down, he heard the door open. His mother had returned home. At that moment, he remembered how he had spent the points and realized that he could have used them much more rationally. Raiden asked to cook something, and Mom immediately moved to the kitchen, carefully taking off her coat. Before she could turn on the stove, Hannah called, worried about her brother's absence. During the conversation, she told him about the latest news, and Raiden realized that he could easily be identified. The association seemed to already have data on everyone entering and leaving that zone recently. His mother could not hide her anxiety, but the hero tried to calm her down with friendly words. He honestly admitted that hunting gives him a feeling of strength, excitement, and inner confidence. Meanwhile, the gates themselves were temporarily closed for inspection. This was important for everyone's safety. The investigation was led by Don, who was considered the best tracker among the professionals in the guild. He came to the conclusion that the monster had entered from the spatial rift, but had not returned the same way. Deciding to test his suspicions, Don followed the tracks, and Yuna voluntarily joined him. They arrived at the place where the body of one of the guards of the underground gate area had been found earlier. There, Don noticed that the tracks led not only to the guard, further, the monster ran into another player. However, this player, despite everything, survived and was able to escape, leaving clear traces of a struggle. It was clear that a violent clash had taken place here, in which the man had managed to hold his own against the creature. Don followed the battlefield step by step, describing what he saw with incredible precision and attention to detail. However, even his skills did not allow him to determine the class of the player who entered into battle with the multi-headed monster. It seemed that he was still skilled in both sword and high-level magic techniques, which caused surprise. This raised many questions. The combination of such skills was encountered only in rare cases. Approaching the place where the decisive blow occurred, Don determined that the player was a wizard. This type of fighter did not have a clear specialization, so they were often called universal or mixed soldiers. They had to constantly balance between physical attacks and the expenditure of magical resources in every battle. The young woman felt more and more confusion. Everything seemed too complicated, as if someone had deliberately confused it. Don continued his analysis, noting that the player's level was around 24. This meant only one thing. The enemy was much stronger, but still suffered defeat in a direct confrontation. It was amazing how a lone fighter, without any help, was able to defeat a high-ranking creature with his own strength. The young woman wondered if there was a way to track this player's movements in order to contact him personally. However, Don replied that the traces of a man were too light compared to a monster, and quickly disappeared without a trace. Realizing that they would learn nothing more, the group left the gate area and returned to headquarters in the evening. The young woman immediately gave orders to check the lists of players who had recently entered this dungeon. She was convinced that such talent should be found and recruited into the association at any cost. Despite state control, all guilds remained independent organizations with their own structure. Their popularity peaked after the crash, when hunters became indispensable to people's safety. At its peak, each guild had thousands of players, and their influence grew with each year of activity. Over time, the authorities began to interfere in the affairs of the guilds, promoting politicians who were far removed from the world of players. This led to criticism, as officials began to use players only as a means of earning money. However, private guilds had strong corporate backing, giving players freedom of action and choice. As pressure increased, politicians lost their authority, and the association began to purge its ranks of outsiders. The reforms began with replacing officials with experienced players who understood the risks and needs. The level of payment for the task began to correspond to market conditions, not inferior to private guilds. This allowed the association to restore the trust of players and expand its influence in the world of hunters and monsters. Raiden slowly packed his things, planning to continue the hunt in another city, away from familiar eyes. He wanted not only to avoid unnecessary attention, but also to check whether the monsters in other zones were more resilient. On the way, he thought about the acquired immortality skill, trying to find at least something similar in the public domain. However, even after a long search on the internet, he could not find even a mention of such an ability. Everything pointed to the uniqueness of the ability, which meant that opportunities for development had to be discovered independently. Arriving at the hotel, the hero stayed in his room, pondering another question: how to hide the number of crystals. When a player leaves a dungeon, all of their belongings are carefully checked upon exiting the gate. Officially, this is done for security reasons, to prevent dangerous items like monster eggs from being taken out. However, all experienced players knew well the real goal: an attempt to avoid tax evasion. The hero understood perfectly well that revealing the real number of crystals was too risky for his situation. He entered the auction looking for storage tools that could hide the loot he had obtained from the dungeon. There, his attention was drawn to an object that created a separate space with access only for its owner. The price was significant, but the possibilities that this thing opened up justified the expense without a doubt. After activating the artifact, a small portal opened nearby, leading to a separate room without light. Stepping inside, Raiden saw a tight space, just enough to store things without others noticing. That same evening, he went to the nearest gate, deciding to immediately test the new discovery in action. At the entrance, he was met by a bodyguard who checked his documents and asked for fingerprints for authorization. Having passed the test, the hero quietly plunged into a new zone where wild red wolves were already waiting for him. Over the next few hours, he fought non-stop, destroying 1,000 monsters and earning another rank. He left a few crystals in the bag for reporting, and immediately moved the main part into subspace. While he was training and testing the new strategy, the Sioux Guild was discussing the hero's capabilities. The guild leadership was shocked by his request for a deposit of 100 billion. But the vice chairman, having become familiar with all the details, decided that such an investment could be justified. He carefully reviewed the proposal, signed the contract, and immediately gave the order to immediately hand it over to the hero. After signing, Raiden was to receive the funds without delay. This was the main condition of the agreement between the parties. The hero passed the test at the exit from the dungeon without difficulty. This time, everything went surprisingly calmly. Over the next few days, he returned to the familiar gates, once again engaging in his usual hunting. Towards the end of the battle, when he was already collecting the loot, his attention was drawn to a skill book called Wind of Rebirth. According to the description, this skill was supposed to speed up the healing of wounds, which sounded quite useful for future battles. Raiden immediately tried to activate the new ability, but the system suddenly made an alarming error. Another message immediately followed. The skill was absorbed into the Book of Immortality automatically. The hero's surprise grew even more when the system reported the development of his main unique skill. This allowed us to assume that the Book of Immortality is strengthened precisely because of the absorption of regenerative abilities. To test the effect, he deliberately scratched his finger and was amazed to see how the wound quickly disappeared. However, despite the absorption, the healing rate remained at the same level, without changing at all. Returning home with thoughts, the hero received a sudden call from a representative of the Second Personnel Section. He was informed that the Sioux Guild had officially agreed to his demand for an advance payment of 100 billion. The news stunned Raiden. He did not expect that the guild would seriously agree to such non-standard conditions. He asked to send the full version of the contract so that he could personally check the details before making a final decision. As soon as the conversation ended, a message arrived about the delivery of a file with an agreement for verification. That same evening, he went to see a lawyer to carefully study the document before signing it. The specialist immediately drew attention to several points that looked too risky for the young player. One of the clauses required 10-fold compensation if the hero's level was lower than the guild's. The lawyer noted that it is not worth signing the agreement in this form. These provisions must be removed without fail. And just as they were discussing potential changes, Raiden received another call from Sao's guild. This time, Ferb, the head of the first department for selecting candidates, called, offering a different amount of compensation. Instead of the previously announced 100 billion, they spoke of 50, a significant reduction, which caused doubts in the hero. He did not respond immediately, noting that he would think about the proposal and asked to send an updated contract. Having received the document, he immediately went to see a lawyer to carefully check its details again. Raiden immediately noticed that the contract came from the same guild, although it looked completely different from the previous one. This raised the question of why two proposals from the same organization differed significantly in terms. The lawyer suggested that the guild might have an internal conflict, different departments playing their own game for influence. In the evening at the hotel, the hero began to independently search for information, trying to find at least something about the disagreements in the management. Not finding the exact facts, he decided to act decisively and began to use the situation to his advantage. Raiden was the first to call Johnson, the head of the second department, demanding not 100 but 300 billion in advance. He hinted that he had received another offer from the same guild, thereby increasing the pressure on his interlocutor. He subsequently called Ferb again, giving him the same information, with the same conditions and the same requirement. Both leaders were puzzled and irritated, each suspecting the other of undermining his authority. To further provoke them, the hero sent them both voice messages with recordings of key phrases. After that, not wanting to be in touch anymore, he deleted all the files and threw the phone in the trash. A month passed when Ferb contacted the guild leaders, reporting that Raiden was nowhere to be found. The top brass were confused. Even with his resources and connections, the hero remained elusive. After listening to the recordings, deep disputes began within the guild, dividing it into two warring camps. The guild leader, realizing the threat to his position, ordered that Raiden be found at any cost, stopping at nothing. The hero hunted tirelessly, earning 600,000 points daily without losing the pace of development. In addition, he actively sold items, from debris to rare items, including simple batteries. However, a difficulty arose. Due to a system limitation, only one item could be sold. Unlike experienced traders who could exhibit hundreds of units, the hero had to act in a limited manner. The only way to make the process easier was to increase your trade rank, but that required 10 billion. Raiden began to calculate the potential income, thinking of ways to speed up his progress. His thoughts were interrupted by an unexpected attack from a monster that tried to sneak up and strike from behind. But thanks to his heightened reflexes, the hero managed to react and dodged the enemy's accidental attack. Raiden then counterattacked, destroying the enemy with professional precision. The very next moment, a group of monsters appeared, sneaking up from the opposite side of the dungeon. Without wasting any time, he activated the skill and destroyed all the enemies at once with one powerful blow. Then a message appeared about the sale of batteries that he had listed on the platform a few hours earlier. Immediately after this, a complaint was received, which spoke of a violation of the platform's pricing policy. One of the sellers demanded that the hero sell his goods at half the current price. Raiden ignored it and put the battery back up, keeping to the established market price. It was instantly purchased, but another complaint was received, this time with a demand to block his account. It became clear that someone was deliberately trying to displace the hero in the trading system of the dungeon. In response, Raiden decided to revise his sales methods to avoid future conflicts. He began looking for loopholes in the rules to sell effectively and avoid falling under the new restrictions. The seller turned out to be Crow, a cunning merchant from a distant planet where he had gained absolute power. Once he had acquired unique trading skills, he grew rapidly, accumulating points and influence at the same time. Through his dexterity and reselling system, he gained leadership and learned to manipulate the market. Despite the abilities of others, he sincerely believed that no one could rise to the level he did. Even large volumes of points quickly disappeared because expenses always exceeded all receipts. Most newbies spent points on healing potions or combat skills to survive. However, there were other players who made money not by hunting, but by selling rare planetary goods. Crow took advantage of this by buying up cheap, fledgling items and then filing complaints against them en masse. The system blocked sellers for 3 months, and after unblocking, everything started again. He kept up the pressure until the players agreed to a fixed price at a predetermined time. But when he opened Raiden's list, he didn't see a single available battery. And that made him wary. At this point, the hero actually ran out of goods, and he went to the store to replenish his stock. Upon his return, he put his plan into action, putting the batteries on sale again, but at double the price. Other players began buying aggressively, without much concern about the new terms or prices. Raiden continued the action, raising the price even higher, testing the limits of patience and the logic of the system. This became a provocation for Crow, but the hero knew that even in the worst case he would make a profit. He subsequently set the price 3 times higher, and by evening there were already 10 billion points in the account. This raised his trading level, and he could now list up to 100 items for sale at a time. However, he decided not to risk raising prices further as the number of complaints had risen to a critical level. So he simply changed the product. Instead of batteries, he put out a powerful camping battery. Crow, upon learning of this, was furious, as he did not expect new merchandise at such a moment of confrontation. He was outraged that 70 new batteries had been deployed in the system, and that this had changed the balance of power. To buy everything at once, it would have cost about 2 billion points. Too much money. He weighed for a long time whether to spend these resources or admit defeat in the silent bidding war. What irritated him most was the unknown. He didn't understand what Raiden was capable of and how far he could go. After much hesitation, Crow began to consider whether he should end the confrontation and focus on something else. Soon, the hero received a message that all the goods on display had been bought without complaint. He immediately noticed an interesting detail. Crow was now selling batteries himself, although he had previously bought them. That evening, Raiden went to the electronics store to restock his inventory for new sales. In another city, a woman with demon wings noticed a new item on the list: an antique slot machine. She was intrigued, and without hesitation she purchased it without even reading the description or further details. Meanwhile, Raiden decided to analyze how the new trading level differed from the previous one. He has already collected more than 14 billion points, gradually moving up the list of the best. But to move on to the heroic level, you had to accumulate a whole trillion points in your account. However, thanks to a recent upgrade, it has received a new feature: reviews under sold items. Among the comments, there were often posts by a user named Bartuk, sometimes friendly, sometimes angry. In his reviews, he wrote about the properties of the products, sometimes praising them, sometimes hinting at their dubious benefits. Under the description of the batteries, he noted that they are no longer relevant because it is better to buy a magic one. The hero knew well that such a thing existed, but its price was too high, so it remained in his dreams. While scrolling through the long list of items, Raiden came across a lot that immediately caught his eye. It was a dragon egg with the seal of subjugation, a rare thing, but at the same time potentially very dangerous. Bartuk appeared in the comments again, this time describing all the advantages and disadvantages of having a pet dragon. His thoughts were interrupted by a call from his mother, who said that someone was standing outside the door and would not leave. It turned out to be Johnson, a representative of the guild, and his appearance alerted Raiden, arousing suspicion. Without wasting any time, the hero called him and asked why he had visited their house. Johnson assured that the guild was ready to accept all the conditions put forward by the hero without any changes to the contract. He hinted that Raiden should discuss this with his family because the decision was really difficult and responsible. But such words caused a wave of anger in the hero, who still remembered the blackmail and the guild's dirty play. He no longer held back and openly expressed his attitude towards the previous contracts that were sent. Now, the most important thing for him was not only preserving freedom, but also defending his own dignity. Johnson tried to explain that the strict conditions were simply a way for the guild to protect itself from risks. He added that if Raiden was truly so gifted, then he had nothing to fear or doubt. The hero understood that everything could have been different if it weren't for the requirement to open the status window before signing. In that case, the contract would be acceptable, but he was not going to risk his safety. He said goodbye coldly and added that a second visit to his mother would have bad consequences for them. Immediately after this, Johnson received a call from his boss, who informed him that the hero's location had been established. The plan was to inform the Uhenu Guild to to immediately begin a well-planned mission. They didn't intend to kill him. The goal was only to intimidate him, to force him to reconsider their terms. Meanwhile, Raiden walked around the city, buying equipment, new clothes, and everything he might need. After a short rest, he went hunting to gain points again and test his skills. For 5 hours, he methodically destroyed the monsters without stopping for a minute in the fight. Having received a new legendary level title, he looked at his watch, determining how much time was left. Since the day was not over yet, he decided to try his luck in another dungeon outside the area. As he headed there, he turned into a narrow alley and noticed someone waiting for him in the shadows. Several men stood silently to the side, but later they began to follow the hero unnoticed. Feeling threatened, Raiden instantly activated his stealth skill and entered the nearest gate. Once inside, he began his usual business. He began to destroy groups of goblins without regret. The hunt went quickly, and he was about to return when suddenly 4 strangers appeared. Their appearance was not accidental. They were the same people who had been waiting for him at the alley earlier. The strangers made claims, insisting that this territory belonged only to their guild. They stated that hunting was strictly prohibited here, and the hero had no right to get anything. After this, they demanded that all the crystals be given to them, sincerely believing that this would be as fair as possible. They didn't stop there and demanded that the hero leave them his equipment as a symbol of forgiveness. Such actions were offensive, but Raiden refrained from emotions, watching every movement. He recalled similar stories on the internet, where not a single electronic device or camera worked underground. In such cases, it is difficult to find out the truth, because one has to rely only on the words of eyewitnesses. And death at the gate is not uncommon, because it can easily be attributed to a random fight with a dangerous monster. Some people use this to rob players, taking away achievements, equipment, and even lives. The situation escalated instantly. The attackers decided to attack, thinking that victory was theirs. However, Raiden was not one to be so easily taken by surprise or intimidated by hostile pressure. He dodged the attacks expertly, carefully maneuvering between blows and studying his enemies. Taking advantage of the moment, he quickly responded with several precise blows, knocking his opponents down. His movements were precise and coordinated, as if the hero predicted every next gesture of the enemy. Meanwhile, another man, hiding in the thick bushes nearby, was closely watching the fight. He knew that the easiest thing to do would be to kill Raiden, but the orders he had received did not allow such actions. Instead, he was told only to wound, to inflict an injury that would deprive the hero of his leg forever. The man cautiously emerged from hiding, and the attackers immediately called him their chairman or leader. Without wasting a second, he rushed into the attack, intending to personally punish the disobedient player. However, Raiden managed to pull the shield out of subspace, keeping it ready before the first strike. The shield flashed with magical light, and the enemy's first blow shattered against it without causing any harm. The leading striker did not hide his surprise when he saw how a simple player with no class blocked his shot. His gaze froze for a moment, and then he repeated the attack with even greater force. But the result was still the same. The hero immediately realized that this enemy was much stronger than him, and not just ordinary hooligans. Raiden didn't hesitate. He snatched a fire spear from subspace and threw it in the direction of the enemy. The spear exploded with a bright flash, filling the area with thick smoke, which the hero used to escape. Flames passed through the leader's hair, burning part of his head, which only increased his rage and thirst for revenge. He screamed in anger and rushed to catch up with the player, leaving a trail of hot air behind him. At full speed, he swung from behind, trying to strike, but Raiden deftly dodged at the last moment. A few seconds later, he turned into a narrow alley again, trying to get away and gain at least a little time. As he left, the hero opened the trade window, quickly scrolling through the list of items in search of something truly useful. His fingers settled on a skill called Survival Instinct, and without hesitation, he immediately acquired it. At the same time, somewhere deep in my head, a feeling appeared that this skill could become decisive right now. He stopped abruptly at the crossroads of the dungeon, allowing his pursuer to get close to him. The hero took a deep breath, feeling how the new ability awakened in him an ancient animal instinct to fight. His plan was clear. In the first seconds of the battle, deprive the enemy of his weapon and then act according to the circumstances. The tension between the two warriors reached its limit, with every muscle in their bodies ready to lunge and attack. Everything around became silent, as if the air itself was waiting for the explosion of action that was to take place the next moment. The hero was about to rush forward when a female figure suddenly cut through the space between them. Her appearance was unexpected and abrupt, as if it cut through time and space with just one thought. It was Yuna. Her appearance was unexpected, and her actions were precise, without doubt in her own rightness and strength. She instantly incapacitated the attacker, smashing his weapon and sending him down with extraordinary ease. Approaching Raiden, she calmly explained that she had been watching him closely from afar all this time. The young woman also followed bandits who had long been suspected of serious crimes, but had no evidence. Its purpose was to test how strong the hero is in a real fight when the situation gets out of control. Without wasting any words, she ordered the leader of the attackers to be raised and prepared for a short interrogation. They helped him to his feet, but the attitude towards him was cold. No compassion or pity. They were interested not only in the clash itself, but also in the motives behind the attack and the organization. Despite the pressure, the bandit had no intention of responding, but only issued threats of public exposure and scandals. The young woman listened silently, without emotion, because she understood perfectly well that they had no witnesses, and she was in control of the situation. His threats rang hollow, because her version of events would be the only one possible for any investigation. The man remained stubbornly silent, not wanting to give even a hint of the information that was so expected of him. She then glanced briefly at Raiden, hinting that it was time to leave them alone for a while. The hero understood the hint without words, stepped aside, and concentrated on controlling the unconscious attackers. And the space around seemed to fall silent, waiting for what would happen in that tense conversation that had begun behind him. As Raiden walked along the deserted path, he found himself lost in thought about the recent attack in the dungeon and its motives. He wondered who was behind the attack and gradually came to a logical conclusion: an order from the Sioux Guild. Such actions could only be a consequence of an internal conflict, so the hero decided to strengthen himself as quickly as possible. It became clear to him that without new strength, he could simply become a target, without even understanding the reasons for the persecution. Meanwhile, Yuna reappeared, having learned the truth by brute force. It really was an order from above. Once they reached the surface, they agreed to meet again to continue the conversation in a calmer atmosphere. The next day at headquarters, Yuna began the conversation with a confession. She had been looking for Raiden personally for a long time. Her suspicions were confirmed. It was he who defeated the three-headed monster, leaving behind many traces. His fighting technique, the abilities he used, even the type of weapon he used matched the description of the winner from the dungeon. But Yuna had no intention of judging. She came with a proposal, not threats or interrogations. Her association was ready to give Raiden full support, but only to get an ally in his person. The conditions were amazing: 100 billion, powerful equipment, access to resources, and no pressure. He didn't even need to open his status, just pass a small test using one skill. The truth contract that the association owned allowed the detection of lies through the light emanating from the player's body. Although the hero hesitated, he did not hide his surprise as to why they were trying so hard to recruit him. The young one explained that most high-level players have a shady past and violate moral standards. And since the hero did not find any traces of crimes, he became an exceptional candidate for cooperation. Raiden assumed it was all due to the level 20 limit, but firmly stated that he didn't know of any workarounds. The young woman did not back down. She emphasized that his results speak for themselves and are worth such a sum. After some brief reflection, the hero came to the conclusion that this agreement really makes sense and is worth accepting. As the decision was announced, a woman approached them with a scroll, preparing the truth contract for activation. The hero did not feel anxious. He was ready for the test. There was nothing to hide from his new allies. After receiving the request, He accepted the skill, although he was not at all enthusiastic about the interrogation process. The questions were difficult and unwelcome, each one forcing me to reveal something that would have been better left secret. Despite internal resistance, the hero still answered honestly, without trying to avoid awkward topics. He admitted that he had a personal skill, and it was thanks to this that he was able to bypass the level 20 rule. After that, the test ended, and he took advantage of the pause to ask Yuna a few questions. He was surprised when the girl admitted that she also had a similar ability, although this happens extremely rarely. She explained that all those who possess such skills occupy key positions in influential structures. However, information about such people is strictly classified and is not available even to the highest government officials. Although she had no right to share such facts, she nevertheless made an exception for the sake of new circumstances. Now they belonged to the same organization and therefore did not have to maintain formal boundaries in communication. Raiden noted with surprise that he had never officially agreed to join a guild or any structure. However, Yuna reacted calmly, noting that now he simply had no choice or way back. At that moment, the assistant returned to the room with the contract, placing it on the table in front of the hero. Without wasting any time, Raiden began to read the terms, gradually becoming familiar with each point carefully and thoughtfully. The general provisions were more than generous. He received everything he could dream of. The only problem was the term. The contract was for life, with no right to revise or renew the terms. If the deal was cancelled, he would have to return the advance payment in a sum 10 times larger, which was too risky. He asked a few additional questions and even suggested changing the dates, but was refused. The young woman simply pointed to general statistics, showing that there are only a few people with personal skills. Although the authorities officially stated that there were 80 such people, in fact, there was only one in all of Korea. For Raiden, it sounded like a revelation. The scale of the hidden world far exceeded his imagination. Raiden was not about to give in, continuing to insist on changing the terms of the contract, especially its length. He insisted that the term be limited to only 1 year, with the possibility of extension if necessary. He was not satisfied with a lifelong debt to an organization he had not yet had time to study. The hero also expressed his willingness to refuse even an advance payment, if this would help limit the risks. He assured that if no problems arise after 2 years of cooperation, he will sign a new long-term agreement. The young woman did not argue, but decided to contact management for additional approval. After leaving the room, she left Raiden to wait, and she herself disappeared for several dozen minutes. Upon returning, she voiced compromise conditions, on which the association nevertheless agreed to conclude an agreement. The main requirement was that the hero must report all offers from other guilds, and if any structure provides similar conditions, he undertakes to extend the contract with the association. Raiden accepted these demands, considering them reasonable, and finally signed the cooperation agreement. After that, Yuna immediately suggested changing his equipment, choosing one more suitable for his rank. The next morning, they went to a room full of armor where resources for the players were stored. Normally, everyone could choose items according to their current rank, but Raiden was given an exception. He immediately noticed the rare class jacket, as it seemed the most practical. While the craftsmen were adjusting the equipment to the hero's size, Yuna suggested going into a small cafe. There, over a cup of drink, she explained in more detail what his main responsibilities would be. He will have to resolve conflicts between players and oversee adventures in the dungeons. In addition, he will have to help the support team, which is suffering from a shortage of personnel. Yuna emphasized that he can always turn to her with any question or problematic situation. Raiden didn't hesitate to share information about the Sioux Guild's activities regarding the stones. He learned that they might have information about the sale of crystals that were purely his spoils. The young woman promised to deal with the situation personally, promising not to leave the question unanswered. She also offered the hero a place to live near the base to make it easier for him to access resources. However, Raiden politely declined, not wanting to commit himself too closely to a specific location. The young woman asked the hero to tell her the address of the overnight stay each time for the convenience of planning tasks. This way, she could select missions for him closer to his place of residence, saving time on travel. To make life easier, she gave out a special expense card, which was not usually provided to newcomers. This gesture violated the general rules of the association, but Yuna decided to make an exception for Raiden. They then went to the central department, where the distribution of equipment was to be completed. In the large hall, the hero tried on new equipment, choosing what best suited his fighting style. He was also ceremoniously presented with a personal membership card of the association, confirming his status. After completing the formalities, he voiced his intention to buy as many skill books as possible. The main goal was to develop strength and improve the Book of Immortality for future battles. The young woman immediately took him to an association store that specialized in techniques and skills. The choice of food was limited, but each book had a unique meaning and the highest military value. Raiden carefully looked through the available selection and purchased a considerable number of the necessary books. The woman led him to the exit, where his car from the association was already standing ready. They said goodbye, exchanging a few words, and then Yuna went to another important meeting. This time, she was heading to the association's director, a high-ranking official named Freud. The man was irritated by the terms of the new contract, in particular its unusually short term. A heated discussion began between them, where Yuna even tried to break the terms of her own contract. She demanded that her contract be renegotiated, but Freud flatly refused, remaining adamant. The argument ended without compromise, and Yuna, not in the best mood, moved to carry out her duties. Meanwhile, Raiden entered his home, where he began to implement his new development plans in peace. Before that, he transferred 1 billion won to his mother, part for his father's treatment, the rest for household expenses. Feeling calmer, he entered his home, already thinking about his next steps. He immediately began to buy new skills, trying to strengthen the Book of Immortality to the maximum. The selected techniques were carefully stored in his personal subspace, where all the artifacts were kept. After this, the hero prepared to spend the accumulated points, focusing on training his strength. By that time, Raiden had already collected a decent amount of money, and most of the items sold brought in a good profit. He decided to visit the second-hand store again, where he had already placed a new order for batteries for trade. When the hero arrived, he was greeted with a smile, shown the goods, and shown the charged batteries. Everything was set up for use or resale, so there was no time to waste on preparation. The store manager noticed that Raiden was paying in points, so he offered a permanent discount. The hero accepted the pleasant offer and immediately placed another additional order for the next batch. Already in the evening, having returned to his motel, he began to spend the remaining resources on pumping up parameters. During this process, he recalled his recent skirmishes and analyzed his weaknesses in combat. Once he finished distributing the points, he immediately activated the new abilities to strengthen the Book of Immortality. To test the progress, he deliberately cut his finger, and the wound disappeared almost instantly, within a few seconds. This meant that the regeneration rate had increased, although the effect was not too obvious without more serious damage. Suddenly, there was a call from Yuna, who reported extremely important news to the guild. She said that all the collected evidence had already been handed over to the police, along with an official statement to open a case. The investigation lasted for more than 1 day, but now the case had reached its final stage. Arrests lay ahead. Despite the guild's strong ties with the prosecutor's office, the situation was exacerbated by a split within the organization itself. One of the parties to the conflict began to provide evidence, in particular internal documentation, speeding up the case. Yuna advised turning on the news, where journalists had already reported on the arrest of the deputy head of the guild. Raiden sincerely thanked for his participation and support, and at the end promised to repay with a tasty treat someday. After the call, he finally took on a bunch of skills he had previously acquired to improve his own abilities. Gradually activating each book, the hero felt how the power of the Book of Immortality grew with each minute. He managed to raise its level to a uniquely heroic one, and this became a new breakthrough in its development. The wave of joy was interrupted by the unexpected thought that at this stage, the book had not yet reached the limit of its potential. He understood how many resources he would have to spend on further improvements, but he was not going to stop. Tired after a busy day, He finally put everything aside and decided it was time to go and rest. The next morning, Raiden arrived at the specified address, where he was already met by a team of several people. Its leader turned out to be a man named Carl, who immediately offered a short tour of the base. He slowly led the hero through the premises, telling him about the specifics of the accommodation and the crew's daily life. After the introduction, Carl led him to the restroom, which would temporarily become his personal space. There he suggested staying until called. Perhaps Raiden would have to work in the dungeon. If a task below level 100 appears, he will be accompanied by a little girl named Chloe. She was 24 and showed no desire to introduce herself, showing obvious disdain. Carl was quick to point this out, emphasizing that respect and courtesy are an important part of working together. However, the girl, considering herself older than Raiden, allowed herself to speak to him in a familiar tone. But as soon as she found out that he was 27, her mood instantly changed. She apologized and left. After a short acquaintance, the hero finally found himself in a room where he could rest a little and fall asleep. The next 4 hours passed quickly, and as soon as he woke up, a familiar figure was already bursting through the door. Chloe quickly reported the call. They were called to a mission in a level 60 dungeon. Inside, according to intelligence, a werewolf appeared, whose level reached the 70 mark or even higher. She assured that 2 experienced participants should be enough to eliminate this threat effectively. During the trip, Chloe was calm, and only before entering did she activate her unusual equipment. A moment later, her body changed shape, turning into a predator, a leopard in human form with a metallic sheen. Raiden didn't hide his surprise, but the girl had already rushed forward, looking for the target without further explanation. Having discovered the monster, she immediately attacked and destroyed the werewolf with the first blow, without stopping. It would seem that everything was over, but the enemy managed to send a signal for help before dying. This challenge did not go unanswered, and a flock of similar creatures quickly approached the dungeon. There were quite a few of them, and they were already flying straight towards Raiden and Chloe, without the slightest intention of stopping. The other players, seeing the wave of monsters, immediately lost their peace and began to retreat from the battlefield in panic. But Raiden and Chloe remained where they were, standing side by side in front of a whole pack of enraged werewolves. They began to destroy the enemies one after another, not allowing the opponents to break through the defense. Each movement was precise and swift. The blows fell like thunder, clearing the space around them. The fight seemed endless, and just when the tension was already subsiding, the real king of the werewolves appeared. Without hesitation, Chloe lunged at him, becoming a mobile lightning bolt of fur and claws. The hero, meanwhile, continued to clear the battlefield, taming the monsters attacking from all sides. The pack seemed to have no end, but he did not stop, persistently fighting and taking blows from all sides. As time passed, with each enemy destroyed, Raiden grew stronger, moving with superhuman endurance. When he finally finished with the last monster, he noticed that Chloe was starting to lose her advantage in the fight. Her attacks were no longer as precise, and the king struck harder, squeezing the field around him. Realizing that she couldn't hold out for long, Raiden quickly rushed forward, snatching the girl from the clutches of the monster. He quickly carried her to a safer place, laid her on the ground, and immediately began the process of recuperating. His hands glowed with healing energy, but danger approached again, unexpectedly and mercilessly. The king fell back, not giving up, attacking from the shadows, trying to catch Raiden in the back by surprise. But the hero's instincts did not fail him, and he reacted in time, intercepting the attack and throwing back the enemy. A new phase of the battle began. The two fighters came face to face, and every second had its weight. Not wanting to give up the initiative, the monster summoned a new wave of subordinates to change the course of the battle. The situation seemed hopeless, but Raiden took it as a chance to try himself for real. Realizing that force alone was no longer enough, he decided to combine 3 projectiles into a single powerful shot. The energy around him flared, and the next moment, a blast wave threw all the monsters far back. Magical blasts of flame and ice flew through the air, covering the monsters in a wave of crushing force. One after another, the enemies fell to the ground, unable to withstand the continuous onslaught and pain. Raiden took up his sword, assuming that the main part of the battle with the king would begin now. The werewolf king rushed forward, leaving behind dust and a barely audible thunder from his steps. The hero did not hesitate. Right in front of him, an ice wall rose up, which was supposed to stop the furious acceleration. The wall cracked, and at that moment, Raiden fired all available projectiles, merging them into one attack. A powerful flash filled the dungeon as the blast hit its target, covering the monster's head. The king could not withstand the onslaught, fell to his knees and crumbled, leaving behind only fragments of strength. The hero quickly rushed to collect the magic crystals left after the long and difficult battle. Among the rubble, he discovered the king's heart, a rare artifact that allows transformation in an hour. But there was no time for research, so he decided to postpone the analysis and return to it later. He picked up the wounded Chloe and carefully carried her out of the battle zone, leaving nothing behind. A short time later, they were already at the medical center, where assistance to the victim immediately began. Soon, Carl appeared. He was worried about Chloe's condition, and he personally decided to find out the situation. Raiden assured that all the wounds were healed, but it was still better to take her to the hospital. The next morning, the girl approached the hero with gratitude, expressing warm words for saving her. Carl and the whole team joined them, and it was clear from their appearance that they were going on a raid again. Despite the recent incident, they pulled together to keep up the momentum and complete the task. Later, everyone sat down in a cozy cafe where they were able to talk a little and release tension. The hero talked about his past, his old job, difficulties in the family, and everything he had to go through. Carl admitted that at first, he considered him to be the descendant of rich people because they were ordered to take good care of him. As evening settled over the city, Raiden was about to unpack his things before retiring for the night. But suddenly, Chloe knocked on the door. She appeared unexpectedly, with apologies and a serious look. She said her first impression was tainted by the traumatic experience of her previous mission. At that time, the son of an official from the association behaved recklessly, and because of this, her previous team suffered. Although he went unpunished, the association punished the players who were only doing their duty. From then on, Chloe preferred to act independently, without relying on other people's orders or promises. Raiden listened carefully to everything and made it clear that he held no grudge and did not consider her guilty. It was important to him not only to trust, but also to understand that behind the neglect, there was real pain. He wanted to ask a few more questions, but he didn't have time. She herself was ready to answer honestly. Her openness pleasantly surprised the hero, and his attitude towards the girl began to change rapidly. Raiden became interested in Chloe's rare skill, the ability to temporarily transform into a predator. In her case, this leopard form significantly enhanced her physical parameters, especially speed and strength. However, despite the advantages, there were also weaknesses, almost zero magic and weak will. Realizing that the girl should not report to him, the hero decided not to ask unnecessary questions. A week passed, and the days passed without incident. Everything remained calm and a little monotonous. Battery sales continued steadily, filling Raiden's account without any difficulty. Eventually, he decided to go hunting again, wanting to stay in fighting shape for long. The guard at the entrance was a little surprised when he saw the hero's card, but still let him in. There was tension in the dungeon as Raiden slowly moved deeper, testing the shield's capabilities. He was amazed by the new power of the defense, but the delight lasted only a moment. The shield was destroyed. The blade cut him in half with such ease that it was as if his body was made of a thin layer of paper. A voice was heard nearby. It was the same former deputy chairman of the Sioux Guild who had disappeared without a trace. His gaze burned with hatred. He considered the hero guilty of his own fall, bringing down all the troubles on him. He admitted that he had set up a barrier in advance so that no one could hear their conversation or see the fight. His plan was simple: leave the country. But before that, destroy Raiden in revenge for everything. The former guild leader said that he wanted to start with the hero's family, but the security ruined the plans. He didn't want to take unnecessary risks, so he decided to attack at the very moment when the hero would be alone. While the enemy was speaking, Raiden had already managed to heal the wound, although he understood perfectly well that this was not enough. The attacker was counting on this, and immediately after the words he rushed into the attack, not giving time for action. Raiden dodged at the last moment, but the forces were unequal, and there was almost no chance of victory. He pulled out the werewolf's heart, a recently discovered artifact, and swallowed it without hesitation. In an instant, his body changed, turning into a beast full of mad fighting spirit. With renewed vigor, he rushed at the enemy, wishing to end this furious battle with one blow. But the enemy seemed to have disappeared. Suddenly, he appeared behind his back, like a ghost, ready to strike. Raiden reacted at the last moment and managed to dodge, after which he immediately tried to strike. But suddenly, everything changed. The enemy seemed to be paralyzed by a sudden discharge of energy. The hero took advantage of this chance and moved forward, but the lightning sword had already disappeared from sight completely. Raiden lost focus for just a moment, and that was enough for the enemy to appear behind him again. Instantly, a new series of attacks began. The hero's body was pierced by thin and painful cuts from the blade. Following this, the name of the attacker was called out, introducing himself as the Lightning Sword from the Wind Clan. His movements were too fast. He suddenly appeared on the side and mercilessly cut off the hero's hand. Without giving him a chance to come to his senses, the enemy also dealt several blows to the werewolf's hind legs. Now, Raiden lost his balance, but despite the pain and shock, he still managed to stay on his feet with the last of his strength. The attacker began the interrogation. He demanded the truth about how to bypass the 20-level limit. However, the hero did not even think about giving up. Knowing that silence was the only thing that could save the situation, he bit his lip to keep from screaming in pain, but didn't say a word, looking forward. Then the enemy began a new series of blows. Pieces of meat fell, leaving the body bloody. For a moment, Raiden felt the thought of surrender rise in his heart, the first time in his life that it had felt so acute. However, almost immediately, he destroyed it within himself, replacing it with a firm intention to betray nothing. The hero no longer asked for mercy. He only thought that if he were to die, then only as a man with honor. So the enemy didn't waste time. In one lunge, he swung and mercilessly cut off Raiden's head. But before he could even catch his breath, a werewolf's powerful paw crashed into his back. The enemy turned around in shock. Raiden was standing behind him, alive, without a head on his shoulders. He silently lifted his own head from the ground and planted it back as if nothing had happened before. After a few minutes, the hero's body was completely regenerated, without a single rip on the skin. This power frightened even him. Such a revival seemed like something beyond reality. Raiden knew that telling even the most trusted person about this would be a big mistake. If the association finds out about his true level, everything could be turned upside down. He realized that he couldn't leave traces, so he decided to burn his opponent's body down to the ground in ashes. After the enemy was destroyed, only a sword, pieces of armor, and a mysterious skill book remained on the ground. When he picked it up, he found out that it was a lightning breath technique of a high, heroic level of strength. Without wasting any time, the hero activated the book, and his body was instantly filled with new energy and lightning. He immediately tested the skill in action. A bolt of lightning struck the target accurately, leaving a crater in the ground. The explosion of power surprised him. He did not expect it to be so powerful and destructive. Subsequently, he was awarded 3 titles at once, emphasizing his level, influence, and achievements. However, the hero decided to avoid frequent use of ranged combat, since it destroys the reserves of lies. A week passed when negative reviews about the product with batteries started to appear on the forum. Users complained about the high price and even suggested organizing a protest or boycott. This made Raiden tense up a bit, though he continued to watch the situation silently. Another month passed when he ran out of points to purchase 2 important skills. Since the choice was not easy, he decided to postpone it until tomorrow to think it over. This day was his only day off in the last week, and the hero decided to just rest a little. Turning on the TV, He stopped at a road that was filmed in honor of the 20th anniversary of the Cataclysm. The plot was about the past, but everyone was worried that this date would once again become the beginning of a new tragedy. Nothing special happened on the 10th anniversary, but now the wave of rumors spread rapidly. The media reported that the number of dungeons was decreasing, but this later turned out to be just a fiction. Raiden continued watching, occasionally thinking about the skills he had yet to master. Suddenly, the house began to shake, and a dull rumble was heard in the air. The floor began to sway underfoot. The hero ran to the window and saw new gates opening in the city and monsters breaking out. Without hesitation, he grabbed his gun, threw open the window, and jumped out into the chaos of the street. He immediately entered into a fight with the monsters, trying to protect peaceful people fleeing from danger. However, the number of creatures grew by the minute. The situation was getting more and more out of control. Soon, other players appeared, and special forces and army vehicles with military personnel began moving through the streets. Martial law was declared, and the authorities began an emergency mobilization of all active players. Raiden immediately established contact with Yuna, informing her of the critical situation in the city. After listening to him, she immediately gave the order to lead the arriving players and stabilize the situation on the spot. The hero also had to quickly relocate to the next location, where the situation was even more difficult. Realizing the urgency, Raiden quickly acquired a new skill, the Vampire Orb, and activated it. A stream of energy filled his body, and he destroyed several monsters with just a wave of his hand in response. After this, he loudly announced a gathering of nearby players, calling for them to join the command. The team was quickly formed, and he immediately divided it into two groups for convenience and efficiency. Meanwhile, attacks continued at one of the stations. The players there were defending people from monsters. They fought exhausted and desperately, trying to hold off the onslaught until reinforcements arrived. At the last moment, Raiden arrived and activated a powerful wall of fire, stopping the enemy advance. Flames rose above the ground, incinerating the creatures that tried to break through to the civilians. The teams joined forces, creating a powerful front, and together they stood against the invasion of monsters. However, the situation changed dramatically when a lizard-like giant suddenly burst out of the gate. The hero didn't hesitate. He reacted instantly and with one precise movement cut off the creature's head. But the triumph turned out to be premature. Dozens of similar creatures began to emerge from the gates. It became clear that the previous enemy was not a boss at all, but one of the ordinary fighters. Raiden continued to fight, wiping out monsters from the face of the earth, when something unexpected happened. During the fight, he noticed an ice spear flying straight from the sky towards him. Fast and accurate. The hero tried to dodge, already preparing to dash to the side, but something suddenly stopped him. One of the monsters grabbed him from behind, squeezing him so hard that it became completely impossible for him to move. And it was at that moment that a spear from the ice crashed into both of them, piercing through the monster's body and hitting the hero. But Raiden managed to raise his shield in time, so the projectile's impact, although powerful, did not cause critical damage. From the thick dust and icy cloud, the Lizard King emerged, radiating menace and pure hatred. They both instantly rushed into battle, where blows followed one another, like lightning in the middle of a storm. However, the situation was complicated by the fact that they also had to fight off other attacking monsters. This gave the boss an advantage, which he actively used, trying to break through the hero's defense. Raiden didn't allow himself to focus on one enemy. His attention was divided between several. He was aware of the seriousness of the situation, so he decided to act decisively, without unnecessary hesitation. In a matter of minutes, he destroyed the wave of lizards that were pressing on him from all sides with furious pressure. The battlefield became quieter, and now only one enemy remained. The king of these creatures himself. An hour of tense confrontation passed before the hero defeated each of them without regret. Leaving only his main enemy alive, he gathered his strength and rushed at him with everything he had. The fight was incredibly grueling, but in the end, it was Raiden who emerged victorious. For this, he acquired a new skill, the White Lizard King's Ice Breath of the extreme level. After the fight, he sank to the ground exhausted and sat for several minutes, recovering his strength. Mana slowly returned to the body, so the hero collected his thoughts and began to collect the received crystals. Over the next 3 days, the monsters continued to press forward, attacking without respite. This has had a significant impact on the global economy, causing profound disruptions in all chains. A huge shortage of electricity, gas and fuel has caused chaos and panic in many areas. The country's leadership decided to begin emergency construction of camps for defense and evacuation. This allowed for a reduction in protected areas and led to a complication of logistical processes. Under such conditions, industry actually came to a standstill, and the production of goods became impossible. Raiden quickly felt the effects on himself. There were almost no goods left for sale. Understanding the situation, he gathered his gear and without hesitation went on to work. Having taken his place in the plane, the hero instantly gave orders to the team and jumped out without delay. The fall was swift, but a moment later his feet touched the ground and the real battle began. He immediately rushed to destroy the monsters, leaving them no chance to take even a step back. However, the feeling was strange. Something in the enemy's behavior was sharply different from the usual patterns. The orcs fearlessly broke through the wall of fire created by the hero as the main barrier. They seemed to have lost their common sense, but they quickly turned around and started running away. Raiden had no intention of letting them escape, so he quickly overtook them and attacked from behind. Everything changed when a giant creature of incredible power slowly emerged from the very core of the dungeon. A blue dragon appeared before my eyes, the strongest of all monsters known to mankind. At the same time, Yuna worked in the command center, collecting the latest data from all areas. She counted the number of players and monsters, trying to assess the balance of power. Tension filled the room as an urgent announcement appeared on the screens. It turned out that another gate had opened in the city, from which they were breaking out without hindrance. The young woman immediately ordered that the greatest guilds be contacted with a request to send reinforcements. Her voice remained calm, although the situation was getting worse with each passing minute. Before the players had time to react, another gate appeared, this time with harpies. The tension reached its peak when he was informed of the appearance of the most dangerous thing, the dragon itself. The information was provided by Raiden himself, confirming that the creature had appeared within the city limits. The young woman understood that there was no time to hesitate, so she gave the order to all the players without hesitation. Everyone had to leave the area immediately, saving themselves and others from death. At the moment when the city around was plunging into chaos, the hero tried to find a way out. He learned that there would be no reinforcements. All players were ordered to leave the city. Despite this, Raiden was not going to retreat, because he could not leave people to their fate. He decided not to engage in direct combat, but to hide from the monster temporarily. The dragon was still pursuing him, giving him no time to rest or think. When the beast finally discovered the hero's hiding place, there was no other way out. He had to run. Realizing the danger, Raiden immediately rushed into a desperate and unequal battle. The enemy was much faster, stronger, and had an obvious advantage in the air and on the ground. No weak point could be found. Each blow only increased the despair in the soul. The dragon left him no chance, gradually driving the hero into a critical and hopeless situation. Raiden eventually ended up inside the monster, losing both legs and one arm. The pain was hellish, but what burned even more was the understanding that it was still impossible to give up. He concentrated, trying not to panic, and began to restore his body with the help of force. The regeneration was slow, but the hope of survival was revived in his heart. Remaining conscious, he gathered the last of his strength to break free from the monster's guts. And although it was becoming more difficult to breathe, Raiden did not stop, not wanting to disappear so suddenly. The hero cut through muscle and bone, breaking through the inner layers of flesh deep into the body of the huge beast. Every movement of the sword was accompanied by tension. Pain squeezed the whole body, but the desire to survive burned even stronger. Outwardly, the situation seemed fatal. Yuna warned that the hero had probably died in the city. According to official information, Raiden failed to comply with the evacuation order and disappeared from radar during the battle. Lists of the dead have already begun to appear publicly, so the family has probably already learned of the loss. In fact, he did not give up. He fought with all his might inside the monster, quite determined to win. His body was exhausted, but his mind remained clear. He was looking for a way to get to his vital organs. When the blade, although worn, reached the important vessel, the hero did not hesitate. He cut it without mercy. In response, the dragon screamed so loudly that the sky shook with its roar, and thick, dark blood flowed from its mouth. Every second from the inside was a viscous torment, but with every movement the monster weakened more and more. Soon, the hero's body partially recovered. His legs functioned again, although they were still fragile. Raiden didn't stop, continuing to go deeper until he reached the heart of this giant enemy. Coming closer, he gathered all his strength and delivered decisive blows, cutting through the heart tissue. These blows were accompanied by a sharp increase in strength. The level of skills began to rise rapidly. At that moment, a new title appeared in the air, which confirmed that the monster was completely destroyed by the hero. As the heart broke, the sword in his hand began to glow. As if responding, the weapon instantly recovered. And then a book appeared before my eyes, an artifact with the skill of the Thunder Dragon scale of the heroic rank. Without wasting a second, the hero activated it, feeling how the power began to flow through every cell of his body. Players arrived at the scene of the battle and immediately saw how the huge dragon began to slowly fall down. Their faces froze in bewilderment. No one expected such a result. It was a real shock for everyone. As the monster's body disappeared, a figure of a man appeared in the cloud of dust, step by step walking forward. At the same time, Yuna sat silently in the helicopter, recalling her recent conversation with the headquarters representatives. The management decided to fine Raiden, accusing him of insubordination, which caused her internal anger. She did not believe in his death under all the circumstances, and she felt in her heart that the hero had not yet said his last. The inner voice did not change. A few minutes later, the radio station confirmed the death of the dragon in the city center. Later, information came in about the player who had defeated the beast, and Yuna couldn't help but smile. She knew that name. Meanwhile, the hero was calmly washing himself on the spot, accepting a warm blanket from the hands of one of the local players. He asked for a phone because the only thing that was important now was to contact his mother and let her know that he was alive. His voice moved the woman to tears. She did not believe that she would hear her son again and did not even know what to say. She shared how Yuna recently came in person with compensation and a deep apology. The woman told how she knelt for a long time, not hiding her tears, considering herself guilty of everything. His mother's story touched Raiden himself. His heart sank, but he smiled gratefully in response to the player's salute. After the call, he noticed his changed sword. Now its power was noticeably greater. The same with dragon skills. She now radiated enormous power. It was hard not to notice. Sitting on the ground in worn-out clothes, he thoughtfully dreamed of the warmth of home, tired of endless battles. But suddenly, like lightning, Yuna jumped from the sky, from a helicopter, and immediately ran towards him. She hugged him with all sincerity, not holding back her joy, as if she had finally seen someone very dear. But a moment later, her gaze fell on his outfit, parts of which were literally torn or burned. This made her frown, as it was only now that she realized how hard the battle had been for this guy. After a tough fight, the hero was brought a change of clothes because his outfits were barely holding up after all the damage. Other players arrived at the scene, among whom immediately appeared those who began to joke about the situation. Several of them hinted that there was more to Yuna and Raiden than just a working association relationship. One of the girls came closer, assessed the hero with her gaze, and made a compliment, playfully throwing questions. The young woman, noticing this, could not contain her emotions, stepped forward, and abruptly stopped further conversations. She ordered Raiden to undergo a medical examination first. Everything else would be decided later. Not now. After this scene, the situation calmed down a bit. Everyone understood that the hero needed rest and peace. It was later revealed that he had stopped stocking new items due to a boycott by buyers. But after just a few days, the situation changed. Buyers began to apologize and asked to return to trading. They admitted their guilt and shifted responsibility to one of the users who started the rebellion. It was at this time that the hero was heading to the store, where she noticed a large batch of fully charged batteries. He didn't think long and decided to immediately buy everything available, leaving nothing on the shelves. After that, he returned home and put the batteries up for sale, slightly increasing the price for each one. In just a few seconds, the first battery found its buyer, and the second one immediately followed. The demand was crazy. Several days passed, and the situation repeated itself. The hero came to the store again for a new batch of batteries. This time he wanted to get more than usual, but the administrator could only offer the standard. The store promised to make a separate order to satisfy the hero's need for more goods. Returning home, Raiden remembered how, even before the second cataclysm, he tried to contact the factory directly. He made phone calls offering a large purchasing contract, but even after the second time, he was refused. The manufacturer refused to work with him because it preferred to deal only with large tech companies. Having realized this, the hero began to think seriously. Perhaps it was time to open his own chain of electronics stores. Only a few days passed, the store opened, and his sister was entrusted with its administration. The hero was going to visit the warehouse to make sure the goods were in stock. But one thing changed everything. His sister suddenly pulled her brother to lunch, claiming that without food, things cannot be resolved. So after a while, he was already sitting on the sofa, simultaneously leafing through the list of goods that had arrived at the warehouse. Unfortunately, the range of products was not very large, so the sales rate left much to be desired even now. Realizing this, the hero decided to spend his points to find a skill for effective ranged combat. The search lasted a long time, because among the many options it was difficult to choose something truly unique. Eventually, his attention was drawn to the teleportation ability, which seemed to be the guardian of the invested resources. Immediately after purchasing, the hero conducted testing, checking the accuracy and ease of movement. The result satisfied him completely, so he began to consider other interesting skills to buy. While searching, I found an ability called Black Lightning and carefully read all the available reviews. Taking into account the positive comments, I acquired this skill as well, hoping for a powerful boost in combat. But when activating the ability, an error occurred, although the dragon's breath suddenly improved in rank. Without putting things off for later, the hero moved to the nearest dungeon to test everything in battle. The encounter with the monsters showed a striking result. His strength increased, and it was noticeable immediately. The hunt lasted 5 hours, during which time he protested almost all the new possibilities. Returning to the store, I met my sister, who was still there, helping with the processes. She reported that a new batch of batteries is already in the warehouse and can be checked right now. The hero decided to inspect the cargo personally, and within half an hour he had completed a full inspection. After that, he suggested to his sister that they return home together, since the day had been very busy. However, on the way, she asked for a minute to talk about the time when he was presumed dead. The sister shared that after the news of the hero's death, their mother lost consciousness right in the apartment. When she woke up, she cried for a long time, unable to come to terms with the thought of losing her son. But the biggest blow came later, when the family received an official fine from the association itself. They were charged a debt for breach of contract and had a lot of formal claims added to the documents. The family was on the brink of financial ruin, and no lawyer could find a quick solution. Raiden, upon learning of this, felt a wave of anger instantly engulf all his thoughts and plans. It was later revealed that Yuna personally apologized for the situation, admitting it was an unfortunate mistake. The next morning, the hero headed to headquarters, wanting to personally sort out the matter. The young woman had not yet arrived, so the staff led him into her office, where he was left alone. Raiden decided to use his psychometry skill to listen to all mentions of himself. Thanks to his ability, he heard the conversations that had been going on in this room for the past few days. It turned out that Yuna defended the hero's honor and protected the interests of his family to the very end. At the same time, the Minister for Gate Management, Maurice, insisted on fines and formal punishment. His position was categorical, and the staff supported this tough line of action. Yuna then returned to the office, and Raiden openly expressed his desire to terminate the contract. The reason was not the fine itself, but Maurice's attitude and his unwillingness to admit his guilt. The young woman tried to make amends for the minister's guilt by apologizing on his behalf, unofficially. She promised to review the rules so that such a situation would never happen again. But this was not enough for Raiden. He demanded forgiveness from Maurice himself. This demand outraged the minister, who did not admit any guilt and considered himself absolutely right. His colleagues sided with him, agreeing that the hero was going beyond the limits of what was acceptable. However, no one had an open plan against Raiden. They were waiting for his next move. So Maurice officially stated that if an apology was really needed, the hero should come to him himself. The next morning, the hero arrived at the association building, heading resolutely straight to Minister Maurice's office. Inside, he immediately activated the psychometry skill to collect evidence of the conversation with the official. Maurice did not hesitate to make it clear that he was not going to apologize because he was acting in accordance with his duty. But Raiden was not going to back down, and emotionally emphasized that he was only carrying out the mission assigned to him. Moreover, it was the minister who approved this mission, and shifting the blame onto others was outright hypocrisy. This greatly angered the official, and he began to talk about the importance of his own position and powers. He tried to impose his superiority by showing superiority, but the hero did not allow himself to be humiliated. Raiden stated that such manipulations would not work, and next time he would have to answer for it. He directly threatened the minister that he would not tolerate any more words or actions directed against him. He then reported that their entire conversation was recorded and would soon be submitted to the court. Finally, he smiled coldly, said goodbye, and slowly walked out of the office without looking back. Just a few days passed, and the scandalous story gained publicity throughout the country thanks to social networks. People began to protest, holding up posters, demanding accountability from the minister. Meanwhile, the hero himself was lying on the bed in his apartment, pondering the latest events and possible consequences. His thoughts were interrupted by a phone call. It was Yuna, who asked for a personal meeting in a cafe. They agreed on a time and place, and then went there together, keeping within the usual rhythm. The young woman suspected that Raiden was the one who initiated the high-profile leak, and openly shared her thoughts. She warned that he could be formally charged with violating the law on official premises. The hero disagreed, citing specific facts and a sequence of events to prove his case. However, Yuna emphasized that even logic does not always save you when the political system is against you. She recalled possible attacks from opponents and recommended disappearing from sight for a while. After some thought, the hero agreed, realizing that a temporary retreat was also a form of defense. At the same time, an extremely dangerous monster named Imugi appeared on the territory of a neighboring state. His appearance caused real panic, because all the attacks of the military could not harm him. Even modern missiles launched from the latest installations proved completely powerless against it. The news began to actively spread alarming information, causing panic among the civilian population. It was at this moment that Raiden and Yuna received an emergency message directly from the association. They wasted no time heading to headquarters while carefully scanning the news feeds. Each headline became more alarming because it showed the Army's impotence in the face of a new threat. They were already awaited at headquarters. The management had gathered all available players to inform them of further actions. The association's leader declared martial law and presented a strategic plan for protecting the state border. It was decided to form mobile groups that would work in different regions in accordance with the threats. Raiden and Yuna were assigned to one of the units responsible for a key defensive area. For the next 10 days, all remaining players fought continuously with monsters at the front line. The number of attacks increased every day, so support was needed throughout the entire territory. At the same time, similar events were taking place in China. Forces were acting in agreement with the association's players. The military, with the help of magicians and skilled warriors, held back the waves of monsters on the eastern border. It seemed that the situation was under control, and suddenly it became known that the Imugi was moving north on its own. No one could accurately determine its level, but it was confirmed that it was a legendary rank creature. Realizing the scale of the danger, the commanders issued orders to prepare for a decisive battle with Imuga. Maximum combat readiness was declared in all directions. Retreat was no longer considered. The military and players began to act as a single mechanism, jointly containing the invasion from all sides. Meanwhile, Raiden, after activating his new skills, immediately headed to the association's headquarters. Inside, numerous volunteers had already gathered, preparing for a large-scale defensive operation. After a short check, he was given a special card with access to the internal sectors of the headquarters. Next, he went into a small room where, according to protocol, the entrance test was supposed to begin. When the hero activated his new ability, something went wrong. The skill began to resist. Only a moment later, the system could not withstand the stress and unexpectedly ended the test ahead of schedule. The hero's abilities were assessed as exceeding expectations, and he was immediately transferred to another unit. A few days later, the situation at the front changed. Monsters began to attack the border en masse. The military used modern missiles to target the Imugi's body with maximum precision. At the same time, players cleared the area of weaker monsters that appeared near the main target. But each subsequent attack had less and less effect on the Imugi. It did not show any exhaustion. A week passed, and the Chinese government held an emergency meeting to discuss further action. Officials could not agree on a future plan because the risk remained too high. But despite the controversy, the decision was made to attract top-level players from all regions. The teams were quickly formed. All those assembled were sent straight to the zone of conflict with the Imugi. A new phase of the battle began, and although the participants fought desperately, their strength was melting away right before their eyes. After a few hours, only 10 people remained from the first detachment who had resisted the attack. However, even in such a situation, none of them thought of surrendering or returning to headquarters. Their eyes were blazing with determination because there were people behind them who needed to be protected. Every blow was full of hope that everything could still be changed if you didn't stop and didn't hesitate. At the same time, the hero was looking at the news when he felt a strong underground tremor under his feet. Almost falling out of his chair, he received a message. The Imugi was heading straight for their team. It later became clear that it was the Chinese players who were deliberately sending the monster their way. Local fighters, having learned the truth, immediately became indignant, not holding back their emotions and angry words. However, Yuna quickly intervened, calling for everyone to remain calm and focused before the battle. The team realized that time was short, so everyone prepared to meet the monster right on the battlefield. As the Imugi approached, the players' coordinated actions allowed them to immediately move into active combat. The young one and several of the stronger participants managed to make deep cuts on his sides. Meanwhile, Raiden watched everything from the ground, experiencing an unexpected feeling of envy. Almost half an hour of fierce confrontation had already passed, but the team did not slow down. Every second seemed like an eternity, but the players fought decisively, not giving the monster a break. The battle was just gaining momentum. The forces of both sides had reached their peak. The atmosphere was tense, and it was at this moment that information appeared about the Imugi's ability to go into a state of absolute berserker. The monster began to direct all its energy only to attack, reducing its defense characteristics. This could have been either a chance or a trap, because his blows became several times more powerful. And then a sudden system message appeared. Activation of combat skills became impossible. The faces of the experienced players instantly showed concern and confusion. The Imugi on the body felt something strange and began to glance at each other. Almost simultaneously, several of them shouted at the others to run away, without resorting to explaining the situation. The danger loomed immediately, and no one could guess what exactly was happening to the monster. It later became apparent that the Imugi had switched to exterminating the remaining mages and healers on Earth. Among those in danger was the main character, who tried to escape using teleportation. However, the system did not work. The monster's power blocked the activation of the skill, leaving the hero without a chance. That's why he received a powerful blow from the Imugi's tail, throwing him forward several meters. Despite the pain and fatigue, the hero managed to stay on his feet, gritting his teeth from inner rage. He grabbed his shield and sword, preparing to defend himself, although he understood that he had almost no chance of surviving. Another blow passed almost through, causing him to lose his balance and almost fall unconscious. There was no equipment or support around. The hero was left in the middle of the battlefield with the monster. Suddenly, he noticed that his sword, which he had lost earlier, was stuck in the tail of the Imugi itself. Slowly, without taking his eyes off the monster, he began to approach, losing strength with each step. The system messages poured in one after another, filling the interface and forcing me to concentrate. According to them, the sword absorbed the monster's blood, which gradually changed its internal structure. Every drop of absorbed energy strengthened the weapon, giving it new magical properties. While the hero was trying to reach his blade, the other players continued to fight without stopping. The monster was weakened, but still dangerous, so the fight continued with maximum effort. Eventually, the combined team's efforts paid off. The Imugi fell, and its body began to disintegrate. A wave of dust and light spread across the surrounding area, causing the players to cover their eyes with their hands. In the ensuing silence, the hero's sword began to glow with a new radiance, as if it had received the blessing of victory. The hero did not waste time and immediately raised the sword, which in the blink of an eye changed its color and combat characteristics. Its indicators increased to an unprecedented level, and a special magical energy seemed to bubble around the weapon. The news of the victory over Imuga spread throughout the world, and the eyes of many countries were glued to this battle. World media continuously broadcast footage from the battlefield, telling stories of the heroism of the country's defenders. A few days passed, and Raiden was back to his usual routine, being in his warehouse with a permit. He received confirmation of participation in an auction where several legendary combat skills were to be put up for auction. Along with this, he also received a monetary reward for the destruction of the monster that threatened humanity. Suddenly, the phone rang. Yuna got in touch, offering the opportunity to buy a rare skill. She asked if he was interested in a legendary-level ability with support at the auction. However, the details remained secret until the last moment. Everything will become known only before the event. Raiden knew that the lack of information was not giving him the full picture and was making his next choices more difficult. Therefore, he put forward his condition. Support would only be appropriate in the event of a complete termination of the contract. If the contract binding him to lifelong service is terminated, he will make a contribution. Otherwise, the hero was not going to accept this offer, despite its benefits. He stood firm in his position, because freedom was much more important to him than any skill. Several days passed, and Yuna made a bid at the auction, receiving the Black Dragon Spear into her possession. The audience was still recovering from the previous lot, when a new, already anticipated item was brought onto the stage. As expected, it was received by the hero, who had managed to prepare for such a result in advance. However, after clarifying financial issues, something unexpected arose. The association's debt was growing at an insane rate. The total debt amounted to trillions of won, which sounded like a death sentence and a complete loss of freedom. Gradually, he realized that he was practically bound by a contract that made him their debtor. Meanwhile, Yuna was also deep in thought, remembering that she didn't get the achievement for the fight with the Imugi. She was surprised that not a single player on the team told her about it, as if everyone was keeping silent by conspiratorial decision. She had no idea that the achievement of the first rank was taken away by Raiden himself at the moment of victory. This fact remained hidden, which only increased her bewilderment and forced her to reconsider the events. His deep thoughts were interrupted by the appearance of the hero, who approached him to congratulate him on his auction success. She also noted caution with new skills that required close supervision. Yuna also opened up and admitted that the entire auction was organized as an association order. Her honesty made an impression, and the hero thought about her words and motivation for a long time after his shower. He noted her determination, while not hiding his gratitude for her sincerity and trust. After retrieving the book from subspace, Raiden attempted to activate the skill, but failed on the first try. He then decided to use another ability, expecting a change, although he was not sure of the result. To his surprise, both skills merged into a single form, giving birth to a new power with unprecedented potential. A little time passed, and the hero went into the dungeon, wanting to test his new powers during the hunt. The skills were powerful, and each attack destroyed the opponents with precision worthy of respect. After returning from the battle, he saw a message from Yuna, who asked him to call back if possible. During the conversation, she asked to go to a cave where there was a catastrophic shortage of experienced players. The hero found it difficult to answer, and a few minutes later, a helicopter was heading in his direction from the military base. After 2 weeks of continuous fighting, he received a system notification about the opening of a new feature. The amount of accumulated points was sufficient to activate the ability to hire combat satellites. Among dozens of names, classes, and levels, the hero's attention was drawn to the candidate with the lowest cost. Her name was Louise, and there was a mark of failure next to her description, which explained the very low price. Without hesitation, the hero hired the girl, after which she appeared in the light of the summoning rays in front of him. Her face reflected genuine surprise when he didn't demand a fight, but only wanted to chat a little. Louise explained that mercenaries are ordinary players who have a special trading skill. They work both for themselves and for the client, completing tasks in exchange for remuneration. The hero became interested in the structure of their system, because he had previously heard about them only in passing, without details. The conversation gradually turned to a discussion of the gates opening chaotically around the world. However, even she, despite her status as a mercenary, did not have deep information about the source of the threat. Both felt that the general mechanism for the appearance of monsters remained a great mystery to everyone. But inside them, there was already a growing decision to collect more data to better prepare for the future. She explained that she received the loser mark on the application form because of her own decision to flee her home country. She was once a simple hunter who fought monsters and became a level 1 player on her own. Over time, the girl began to acquire skills, equipment, and went hunting every day for the sake of survival. This continued for many years, and she stayed afloat for 16 full seasons. But after the start of the second cataclysm, the situation got completely out of control, leaving no choice. Despite all efforts, combat power did not help, and the enemies destroyed everything in their path. She then activated the spatial movement technique, trying to hide in a safe place. Instead, she found herself stuck in an interdimensional vacuum where there was no light, no matter, no time. There was complete silence and endless darkness, swallowing up all hope of salvation. Its only support was the skill system, namely the division for registering free mercenaries. She put herself forward, hoping that some player would take her into his world. One after another, applicants appeared, but all categorically refused to grant him asylum, until one of the players offered a tough condition: to pay 24 million points. This was only possible in limited cases where both parties had related skills. To confirm her words, she even showed the mechanism of this system using the hero as an example. She then refused the deal, but the player hired her again and again put forward the same condition. Eventually, the girl agreed and began to work, hunting non-stop, only for sleep or short meals. Her profits stabilized, and she could breathe freely again, albeit briefly. When the player demanded even more points, she terminated the contract and was left without orders. Since then, she remained alone and jobless until she finally received a call from Raiden. And now she asked for the same opportunity, to stay in his world forever, without returning. She promised to bring in a daily profit of 24 million points. It also guaranteed full combat readiness, carrying out a hunt at any point at the hero's request. The hero needed time to think, because the decision was not an easy one, so he was in no hurry to make the final choice. After a brief hesitation, he decided to rehire her to take a closer look at the statistics window. He was amazed by the amount of more than 3,500 points that the girl had accumulated over her life. But despite his impressive performance, Raiden was in no hurry to make a long-term commitment to her. Therefore, I decided to work together temporarily at first, choosing her as a mercenary only for individual outings into battle. This allowed us to assess the situation, collect results, and avoid hasty decisions in the future. They went to one of the dungeons where, with their joint efforts, they quickly dealt with the invasion of monsters. During the fight, she noted that this world was very convenient for hunting due to the lack of competition. There were no lines or fights over loot, which was a big contrast to what she was used to. After completing the mission, they said their goodbyes, and Raiden signed a short-term contract. A week passed, and the changes became noticeable. The number of titles, achievements, and profits increased significantly. He noted with surprise that all this began immediately after he first invited her to the team. This made me think that perhaps her influence was much greater than it seemed at first glance. After another hunt, the girl shared her comments on sword technique. In her opinion, the hero's movements were not polished enough, and the style needed significant improvement. She advised hiring a professional swordsman and taking at least a basic course of individual training. Such a decision could significantly increase Raiden's combat effectiveness in future confrontations. Then she suddenly suggested that he test his skills in combat, excluding all skills. This decision was unexpected, but the hero agreed without hesitation, wanting to test his true skills. Within a few minutes, both were sparring, keeping their distance and analyzing their movements. Raiden tried not to lose, but after 3 minutes he recognized his opponent's clear advantage. Her technique was precise, her movements were polished, and her blows came from everywhere, leaving no chance. After the fight, she explained that she had many years of experience and a high rank as a player behind her. The hero realized that without proper education, growth is limited, and made an important decision for himself. He sincerely asked the woman to become his mentor in order to improve his swordsmanship and grow in combat. She accepted the offer, and from that moment on, their training became a regular part of every day. Several months passed, and the association sent elite players to the north to clear the dungeons. Raiden was also among them, but the routine environment gradually led the players into a state of apathy. Players from guilds, although they wanted to cooperate, lost interest and wanted to quickly return back. Life in those conditions was far from comfortable. Everyone lived in tents because there were not enough buildings. Food consisted mainly of canned goods, and water often had to be waited for or purified by hand. The association's players did not mix much with others, focusing primarily on completing tasks. Raiden himself was interested not only in hunting, but also in further training from an experienced mercenary. After another training session, they discussed the preliminary agreement about her life in his world. The hero promised to make efforts to resolve all issues related to her status in the system. But what bothered her more was the identification photo, which caused her internal resistance. She felt that she no longer looked so young and doubted whether she would make the right impression on the system. Her concern was sincere, because appearance is not just a look, but a symbol of faith in one's own presence here. The next morning, the hero set out on another raid, hoping for a quick hunt without any unnecessary surprises. However, even before the first fight, something was bothering him, as if someone was watching him from a great distance behind his back. Before he could look back, he came across a group of monsters lying in wait at the very entrance to the cave. He instantly activated his abilities, destroyed his opponents, and assessed the seemingly rather quiet situation. But deep down, there was still an unpleasant feeling that someone was hiding in the shadows and giving me no peace. A moment later, he felt another presence again, as if a gaze was piercing through his back and did not disappear. Without hesitation, he activated his combat skill and turned sharply, trying to hit the enemy at once. But his blow missed. The opponent turned out to be not only cautious, but also surprisingly quick in his actions. Suddenly, a silhouette appeared before him, silent, agile, dressed in the dark gear of a killer. Without further ado, a rapid duel began between them, turning into a real dance of death. The enemy had teleportation technology, thanks to which he disappeared and appeared on the other side every now and then. His movements were too fast, and it seemed like he could hit from everywhere at once. Despite this, Raiden remained calm and acted methodically, not allowing himself to be caught off guard. Each blow from the hero carried with it a power that made it clear that the advantage was gradually shifting to him. Although the attacker did not stop his attacks, it was difficult for him to hold back the onslaught, which grew stronger with each passing minute. Their duel stretched out over time, turning into a test of not only skill, but also endurance. Every movement, every dodge was calculated to the second, as if both were acting on the edge of human capabilities. Although the enemy was cunning, he was inferior to the hero in strength, because he held on confidently and did not give in to weakness. The enemy suddenly changed tactics, refusing to fight and deciding to retreat from the battlefield. But the hero was not going to allow escape, so he immediately rushed after them, reducing the distance with each step. The chase turned into a new fight, where each of them sought to finish the fight on their own terms until the end. Suddenly, Raiden delivered a precise blow that should have been the final one, but the enemy's body dissipated into a thick fog. The enemy appeared behind the hero, hoping for surprise, but this time the plan did not work. In response, the hero turned around with lightning-fast reactions, repelled the attack, and delivered the decisive blow. This final moment ended the duel. The enemy was destroyed, leaving behind only the trophies he had obtained. Among the loot was a skill book called Shroud of Darkness that had significant potential. He also found a rare dagger labeled as Weapon of the Dark Elf King with a dark sheen. Along with it fell a pendant on which glowed the words Protective Blessing and an ancient guardian shield. The hero, without delay, tried to activate psychometry to find out more about the killer's identity. However, the system did not allow access to the information, so I had to ask a friend for help. He immediately called Louise, briefly describing the course of events and everything he had learned during the battle. After some thought, she suggested that the enemy might have been testing the hero's actual level of development. Or there is an organization that tried to eliminate Raiden, who became too noticeable among others. In the evening, returning to his tent, the hero felt how fatigue was replaced by anxiety and slight alarm. Suddenly, at the entrance to the camp, he was noticed by a girl who was clearly surprised that he remained alive. She instantly realized that the killer had been defeated, so she decided to check out the site of their fight herself. Once in the dungeon, she activated the ability Vampire's Gaze, which allows her to see traces of actions. Then she used the Memories of the Earth, thanks to which the figures of both fighters appeared in the air with precise movements. Everything was reproduced very accurately. Every step, every blow, and even the moment of death of that killer. When she saw the fall of Dahashi, a famous mercenary, she was filled with surprise and anxious curiosity. Raiden's power was clearly beyond expectations, and now it remained to find out who he really was. News of Dahashi's defeat spread quickly throughout Japan, causing turmoil throughout all of the country's government institutions. Gate Minister Tanaka was shocked, as he didn't expect that an unknown player could defeat such an enemy. Concerned about the possible revelation of Raiden's unique power, he decided to act quietly. Therefore, he ordered 5 agents to be sent to Korea who were capable of acting secretly and without leaving any traces of outsiders. At the same time, the hero continued his persistent training under the supervision of his experienced mentor. They practiced sword techniques, gradually moving on to more complex close combat techniques. Louise suggested that they engage in a friendly duel to gauge Raiden's progress in both attack and defense. The fight did not last long, but it clearly showed that the hero's movements had become faster and more decisive than before. However, she noted that he still makes unnecessary moves that could be costly in a real fight. Louise advised training without a shield, because it develops concentration and strengthens fighting instincts. Not using a shield introduces risk, but it helps you better understand the limits of your own endurance in combat. After completing another recruitment cycle, it's time to head to the next level of the dungeon. The hero left the temporary camp and headed to a new place where he was supposed to test his skills in practice. His movements were confident, but at some point, he had a strange feeling that someone was watching him. It was a strange, light, but disturbing feeling, like a presence hidden in the very shadow of space. He looked around, however, there was no one nearby, but his inner instinct told him The threat had not yet disappeared. The air became a little heavier, and the heart worked in the rhythm of a premonition of something big and dangerous. Approaching the entrance to the dungeon, the hero concentrated, because a new stage of the dangerous test was beginning. A man with unusual pink hair, dressed in a discreet combat uniform, emerged from the thick shadows. His language immediately gave away his origins. He spoke Japanese, thus revealing his nationality. He calmly offered a choice: either submit or engage in battle, leaving no room for compromise. However, for Raiden, such a proposal was not even an option, because capitulation was essentially alien to him. He quickly assessed the situation and decided that the other Japanese would not interfere, at least not yet. Without wasting any time, the hero drew his sword, holding it confidently, and prepared for a clash focused on the edge. The fight began by surprise. The opponent disappeared and appeared on the other side, using spatial jumps. This created serious difficulties, as Raiden did not have such flexibility in his movements during combat. However, he did not panic. On the contrary, he immediately began to control the expenditure of lies in order to prolong the duel. Both opponents acted with exceptional precision, demonstrating experience, agility, and endurance without tiring. Other agents watched from the sidelines and did not hide their surprise. They did not expect such a level of fighting. Especially considering that the hero had only awakened his power a year ago, it was incredibly impressive. Their mission was purely analytical: to observe, analyze, and try to deduce patterns. They wanted to understand exactly how Raiden made such progress so they could replicate it for other players. Meanwhile, the fight did not lose its intensity. The enemy struck, cutting the hero's shoulder. Despite the pain, Raiden did not retreat, gritting his teeth and maintaining a fighting stance, not giving in to weakness. At a certain point, the situation became critical. The forces were waning, the resistance was becoming more and more difficult. There were no chances left. But suddenly, in response to the threat, a hidden skill was activated that ensured survival in battle. Everything happened so quickly that Raiden himself did not have time to realize the moment of the final blow. His body moved instinctively, and a second later, the sharp blade of the sword cut through the enemy's neck. The opponent's head fell to the ground and the tension dissolved into the air, leaving behind silence and surprise. New figures began to emerge from the depths of the darkness. The rest of the Japanese agents, who had quickly surrounded the hero. And although the situation was tense, Raiden did not lose his head, but immediately called Louise and several mercenaries. He understood that he couldn't cope on his own the second time, so he tried to balance the forces and avoid unnecessary casualties. Only a few moments later, the atmosphere thickened even more as a new, fierce battle began. Each of the summoned allies chose an opponent, engaging in a short but intense duel with him. The mercenaries acted in a coordinated manner. They struck with precision, restraint, trying not to kill unless absolutely necessary. It was agreed that living enemies would give more answers, while bodies would only give silence and burden. Raiden himself, exhausted from the previous clash, stood to the side and watched the fight carefully. A feeling of pride and peace filled him inside. He was not alone and could entrust the matter to others. The enemies were defeated one after another, deftly, methodically, confidently, without unnecessary movements or delays. Soon, all those who were still conscious were gathered together, tied up and seated directly on the ground. Silence fell over the dungeon as Raiden slowly approached and began interrogating the prisoners. He was interested in one thing: who sent them here and why he became their target in this remote place. However, the prisoners remained silent, stubbornly, even humiliatedly, without showing any reaction or hint of the truth. The tension grew with each passing minute, and it was already clear that a peaceful conversation would not yield any results. Then one of the mercenaries, a man of strong build, slowly approached the silent enemy. In his hands was a massive war hammer, which looked menacing even when stationary. Without a word, he swung, and with a dull blow shattered the leg of one of the prisoners. A wave of pain ran across his face, and the others recoiled in fear, realizing the seriousness of the situation. The formidable mercenary calmly said that anyone who remained silent would suffer the same fate or worse. The mercenary began to slowly count out loud, holding the hammer in his hand, ready to punish silence with pain again. As soon as the number 3 was heard, he raised his weapon when one of the Japanese women responded in fear, breaking the silence. She admitted that the real goal of their group was to kidnap Raiden and transport him to Japan immediately. The reason was that the hero broke the level 20 limit, disrupting the balance of players in the world. Hearing this, Raiden began interrogating each prisoner separately using his lie detection skill. One of the Japanese tried to lie, but regretted it a moment later when he came under another blow. The mighty mercenary silently swung his hammer and hit, forcing the truth to come out again. As a result of the interrogation, the hero learned of another group located outside this dungeon. There was no concrete information about their numbers or strength, only hints and vague words. Raiden decided to head for the exit on his own, leaving his comrades to watch over the prisoners below. He didn't want to put anyone in danger, so he moved forward carefully, step by step. There really was one of the spies waiting at the exit, whom the hero quickly neutralized, not allowing him to escape. After a short check of the area, Raiden returned back to the dungeon without further ado. The mercenaries were just getting ready to leave because they had other tasks, so they said goodbye and disappeared from sight. However, before they had time to retreat, 2 Japanese suddenly rose up and rushed to attack, trying to escape. It came as a surprise, but Louise reacted with lightning speed. In a moment, her sword was already in action. She left them no chance. She acted confidently and accurately, destroying both of them in a few moments. Raiden saw the others try to hide behind him, but he no longer hesitated. He destroyed them personally. He acted decisively, leaving no room for regret or hesitation because it was already war. The hero collected all the trophies after the battle and sat down to calmly think everything over without unnecessary haste and emotions. It became clear to him that the first goal should be the safety of his family, which must be guaranteed in advance. He had no illusions. The association would not provide the necessary protection, so he had to act independently. The hero spent points and acquired 3 rings of protection at once, as well as 3 bracelets for exchanging items. Separately, he took a transporter that could instantly knock a person over a huge distance in an instant. The next morning, he went to the electronics store where his younger sister worked. The girl was stunned when her brother suddenly handed her a set of protective items in a bundle. After a short explanation, he said goodbye and returned home, where their mother was waiting. And Raiden gave her the same set: a ring, a bracelet, and a means for a quick retreat in case of an attack. In the evening, he entered the hospital to visit his father, and did not forget to take care of his safety too. Even in his hospital bed, he received a set of equipment that was supposed to protect him in case of danger. A week passed when the Minister of the Gate of Japan heard the news of the failure of the special operation against the hero. He was outraged and disappointed because there were no more agents left in reserve for the new mission. Suddenly, another official entered the office, carrying a fresh report on events near the city of Fukuoka. It turned out that the local Yamato Guild had completely perished, including its leader and all members. The Choju monsters there were of legendary rank, unknown strength and origin. According to the description of the wine, my wings were very fast in the air, and this created a huge danger for the country. The minister gave an immediate order to send all available players to the zone before it was too late. While the players were heading to the scene, local military personnel were trying to hold back the onslaught of the monster wave. But the forces were unequal, and Fukuoka was in danger of disappearing if help did not arrive in time. When the players finally arrived, they immediately entered the battle, supporting the army in the defensive line. At the height of the skirmish over the battlefield, their numbers began to increase. The fighters spared no effort in fighting back when a new enemy appeared in the sky: the king of the winged monsters, Choje. His sharp cry caused the other creatures to stop, then quickly fly away and take up positions on the rooftops. Several attack helicopters were shot down with a single wave of his wing before they could even respond. Despite the chaos, the soldiers and players did not stop fighting, clutching their weapons even in the worst moment. But as soon as King Choji struck the ground, most of the players were instantly destroyed. The scale of the losses shocked the minister, who received the report just a few minutes after the events at the front. It became obvious to him that this monster possessed an intelligence capable of outpacing and outplaying any tactics. When the minister watched the video recording of the fight, he fell silent for a long time, carefully studying every movement of the creature. At the same time, information about the disaster reached the hero, who was returning from another raid. He was shocked by the images of the devastation, and no less shocked by the news that Japan had officially asked for international help. A little later, he called Louise to his dungeon to ask about these amazing choji creatures. The conversation turned out to be disturbing. The woman said that a swarm of chojivs was capable of turning any country into dust. Their killing skills, endurance, and numbers can lead to the world's complete destruction in a matter of days. Even if one creature can be defeated, their leader, King Chojiv, poses a constant threat. And if this horde appears in full force, no army will be able to hold the defense for long. The hero listened silently and realized that the threat really went beyond the usual scale of battles. Louise explained that monsters have the ability to evolve, just like players, gaining experience and new strength. They destroy other creatures or people, receive crystals that open the way to overcoming limitations. This allows them to become even stronger by changing their form, tactics, and using new skills. 3 months have passed, and Japan still has not been able to cope with the threat from the Choji and their king. Each week, these monsters captured new territories until another large city fell under the onslaught. Japan did not stop trying, constantly turning to other countries for support. Meanwhile, in Korea, restoration work after the large-scale Second Cataclysm has already been completed. This allowed North Korean players to come to the southern dungeons to hunt. Players arrived in droves, filling every registration line at associations across the country. The hero tried to clear all the northern dungeons, but he couldn't cope alone. However, now that enough players had arrived there, he could calmly return home to his family. He was greeted by a warm atmosphere, and although he did not show emotion, he felt relief in his heart. Subsequently, the hero went out into the city, where in one of the alleys he called Louise, who had been waiting for this moment for a long time. They went to the association's headquarters to go through the process of verifying the woman's identity. The association had special conditions under which players could obtain citizenship without additional procedures. This included benefits, bonuses, and protection, but also an obligation not to leave the country for the next 5 years. And one more rule: do not join any foreign guild, while the state agreement with the association is in effect. The hero remained waiting outside, watching the people who walked past without hurrying. It wasn't long before Louise emerged from the building with her official ID in hand. Her face glowed with joy, because now she was officially a part of this world, just as she had dreamed. They grabbed a drink and decided to take a walk around the city, when a quiet conversation began between them. Raiden talked about the idea of selling unique items through Louise's skill exchange ability. He believed that her ability could provide access to valuable goods from other worlds or even dimensions. Louise had no opportunity to return home, so the hero suggested that they stay together for a while. This decision was beneficial to both. She received profit, and he received constant access to an exclusive resource. According to the agreement, she was paid a commission in the form of a share of the profits from each sale. In addition, Raiden promised to help her fight the monsters that destroyed her home world. These words touched Louise to the depths of her soul, her eyes filled with tears of sincere gratitude and hope. Without holding back her emotions, she dropped to her knees, solemnly pledging allegiance to her new ally. At the moment of taking the oath, a message appeared on the screen about receiving the title of Lord and new skills. The hero helped her up, and the system recorded the new status and opened the role skills section. It became a symbolic act of trust, uniting them not only by contract, but also by the power of their roles. They then returned to the office, where in a cozy room Louise explained in detail the essence of the new title. It turns out that the role of a lord is a basic requirement for taking such oaths among high-level players. Louise herself had the rank of a heroic knight, which she achieved through many years of battles and trials. She gradually completed all the conditions, opening up a quest branch to obtain this honorable combat role. It took her about 15 years of fighting, training, and continuous travel to achieve this. She gave Raiden some advice on how to progress much faster, using knowledge and resources. The number of role skills directly depended on the development of the rank itself and the level of the subordinates involved. The more allies and the higher their level, the stronger the new skill called leadership became. Its effects affected not only the hero, but also the fighting strength and motivation of the entire group under his command. As the faction developed, Raiden gained access to Louise's detailed status window, which he immediately opened for inspection. He looked carefully at all the data, trying to understand what the Oath of Allegiance gave within the framework of their union. According to the terms, if the oath was revoked, both parties would be subject to a serious fine from the system itself. For mercenaries, the consequences were severe: loss of levels, reduction of stats, and a rollback of all acquired skills. Also, a new lord could not appear before the same amount of time had passed as the previous service had lasted. Even if the relationship was voluntarily terminated, everything that was received within the framework of the Union disappeared irretrievably. Meanwhile, Japan continued to suffer from the invasion of monsters that were moving deeper into its territory. The situation was becoming critical, so the government was forced to make decisions hastily, sometimes without coordination. Meanwhile, Raiden completed another hunt in the dungeon and rose to the surface with Louise. They discussed the latest achievements, comparing achievements and studying the increase in combat strength. Yuna called unexpectedly and immediately brought up the topic of a trip to Japan as a potential mission. Her argument was that this journey could bring benefits and open up new opportunities for Raiden. She said that she herself was also planning to go there, since the country's government had promised a generous reward. The hero, without losing his vigilance, urged her to be careful, while getting into the car with Louise. The atmosphere itself was calm, but there was a sense of anxiety in the air from the rapid developments. The young woman reminded him of the previous promise he made after defeating the Imugi, to treat her to dinner. Smiling, the hero agreed to fulfill this promise as soon as he returned from the dangerous mission. They agreed to meet when everything had calmed down and both had returned from their next missions without damage. After saying goodbye, Louise shared her thoughts and approved the preliminary proposal for cooperation. She recalled the recent events with the attack by Japanese agents and expressed her readiness to resolve this personally. The woman offered to fly to Japan and destroy the enemies herself in order to ease Raiden's situation. However, the hero calmly rejected this idea, explaining that there was no need for it yet. Several weeks passed, and Raiden went to another dungeon where a horned turtle monster lived. His goal was not only to obtain the crystals, but also to test his own fighting form in new conditions. While combing the tunnels, he unexpectedly came across a group of players who were already fighting against the local creatures. One of them fought bravely with his bare hands, while the other concentrated on treating the wounded. This immediately aroused curiosity. Raiden stood at a distance, watching the actions of the team, who seemed to have their own internal arguments. The player who had just been healed wanted to end the fight, but the main participant demanded that the hunt continue. A heated discussion arose between them, which quickly escalated into a quarrel, although sobriety eventually prevailed. The situation seemed strange, and Raiden began to suspect that there was a hidden conflict of interest between the players. Taking a closer look, he realized that the fighter had been stripped of his armor on purpose to avoid the cost of repairs. After this, the hero chose silent observation and decided to follow the team's further actions. As the group moved on, Raiden kept a wary distance, but kept his eyes on the suspicious leader. The next battle began suddenly, and Raiden could not stand it. He intervened to finish off the monster and protect the offended one. This action angered the other players, especially the leader, who wanted to keep the rare rank skill book for himself. The situation escalated, but Raiden was more interested in the wounded guy than the prey itself, or the dispute over the trophy. He approached him and started a conversation, trying to find out how much they paid and what their working conditions were. Hearing this, the team leader became even more angry, and the conflict quickly escalated into another direct skirmish. The hero drew attention to the rude attitude in the team and the general indifference to other people's problems and needs. He pulled out an association card, giving him full authority to interfere in the activities of other groups of players. The victim, named Josh, only noted that he would receive enough money and that everything suited him. Raiden realized that he wouldn't be able to find out the truth in a normal conversation, so he activated psychometry. A flashback scene immediately appeared before my eyes, in which the team first admired Josh's strength. But then they started to get jealous, discuss his pay, and think about how to reduce it without explanation. Suddenly, while hunting, they were attacked by monsters, and the situation got out of control very quickly. In a panic, the leader ordered Josh's armor to be removed so as not to waste points on repairing it. The neglect became obvious, and the betrayal on the part of the team only revealed the true nature of the relationship. That evening, Josh returned home, where his worried sister asked him to save his strength and not disappear. She said she started working to help her mother pay for ongoing treatment. The next day, the leader threatened that if Josh talked, he would no longer be able to hunt with them. The hero realized that words would no longer help and ordered everyone to go outside for a check. The team felt threatened, and the tension between the sides grew with every minute of silence. Raiden, meanwhile, turned to Josh with a promise of help if he would just close his eyes. He promised that he would be able to buy everything that the family needed, even tasty things for his sister. When the leader suddenly attacked, the hero calmly dodged and with one movement deprived him of his arm. The other teams stood frozen in indecision, unsure of what to do after such a sudden turnaround. The leader, kneeling down, seemed to agree to appear before the court, admitting guilt. But the hero silently took a step forward, without hesitation, and delivered a decisive counterblow. After the fight was over, everyone went to the exit of the dungeon, where police officers were already waiting for them. Law enforcement officers detained the perpetrators, and each was taken in for questioning for further investigation. The next morning, Josh's mother was already in the hospital, receiving proper medical care. The guy promised not to leave the kindness unanswered and offered help in future battles. Raiden asked him to show his status, and the stats window actually caught Louise's interest. The woman immediately noticed the great potential that could be directed towards developing the knight class. The right approach could turn the guy into an irreplaceable fighter, strong, resilient, and reliable. When Josh expressed a desire to train, Louise suggested a special form of submission. She explained that the connection with the hero would open up new opportunities for both parties to this agreement. Raiden agreed, and first of all decided to strengthen the guy's body by using a magic pill. He also gave him rare skill books that greatly increased his basic combat potential. Louise then noted the importance of hunting alone to achieve personal achievement. This will help to strengthen endurance and also teach you to overcome difficult situations on your own. To begin with, they went into a dungeon together to test Josh's actual fighting skills. The young man entered into a skirmish with the woman, showing everything he was capable of at that moment. The battle lasted for about 2 hours, and he fell to the ground, completely exhausted, unable to get up. But despite her fatigue, Louise was pleased with what she saw and recognized Josh's high potential. She understood that this guy would show himself and surprise many with his future achievements. Meanwhile, in Japan, battles with the Choji continued, each victory achieved at an incredible cost. Players have reached the mark of 400 destroyed monsters out of the planned amount of 1,500. At the same time, the commanders transmitted new information to headquarters about the forceful influence of the yellow monster. The collected data must be taken into account in the further operation, which was prepared as soon as possible. Missiles were fired at the monsters, which exploded instantly upon impact, causing severe destruction. However, even such a powerful attack did not bring the expected result. The operation ended in failure. Despite extensive efforts, the main goal was not achieved, which led to disappointment. 3 weeks have passed, and during this time, Josh has passed his theoretical and practical tests without difficulty. Now he officially received a player card, which gave him the right to hunt in dungeons on his own. That same day, Raiden got out of the car, heading to the designated place without hurrying. A player approached Louise not far from her and invited her to join one of the guilds. The woman politely but firmly refused, not wanting to join third-party organizations. But the player was not going to stop, roughly grabbing her arm and forcing her to turn around to face him. At that moment, Raiden intervened, decisively breaking the attacker's fingers, leaving no chance for resistance. The hero immediately recognized that the stranger was a representative of a guild that had long aroused suspicion. To avoid unnecessary attention, Raiden created a dome that completely blocked out all outside sounds. He suspected that Louise might have accidentally attracted the guilds with her recent growth. Continued the conversation with the player in a calmer tone, trying to achieve at least some politeness. After this, Raiden forced the stranger to leave, leaving him with damaged pride and pain. Louise just nodded in gratitude, and together they went into the new crocodile dungeon. On the way, they discussed Josh's recent achievements, which were truly astonishing in their pace. The woman happily noted that the young man had become much stronger and continued training every day. Her tone was full of pride because she invested knowledge and faith in potential into it. Suddenly, they sensed the presence of an enemy nearby, which caused them to instantly change the course of the conversation. Without wasting any time, both prepared for battle, carefully avoiding the arrows flying in their direction. Together, they were able to defeat the first monster, which resisted strongly, but still fell to the ground wounded. But as soon as they caught their breath, new creatures appeared, and the threat became even more dangerous. It seemed the dungeon wasn't going to let them go without a trial, sending enemies again. Without wasting time, they attacked immediately, acting in a coordinated manner and neutralizing one threat after another. After the battle, each of them rested a little, gathering strength before the next part of the mission. Their endurance became a key advantage that allowed them to hold on despite fatigue. After a short break, they went deeper into the labyrinth, where a new challenge awaited. At this time, in the Dark Guild, Asher reported the latest news about Louise to his leader. He told about his meeting with the hero, which greatly angered the ambitious guild leader. Although the situation looked threatening, they had no intention of retreating or changing their plan. Their sponsor had strictly ordered that they capture Louise, so they had no choice. The woman was a valuable asset to them, whose power they wanted to use for their own purposes. Meanwhile, Raiden met with Josh, who had just returned from another successful hunt. They briefly discussed the results, and the hero gave the guy a reward for the collected magic stones. Josh, without thinking, tried to return some of the funds in gratitude for the help, but Raiden refused, not wanting to take even a penny for the support he was providing voluntarily. They agreed to continue training the next day since Josh's growth was obvious. When the day ended, Asher was in the guild carrying out a new order related to the protagonist. He obtained detailed information about Raiden and his associates, analyzing it carefully. At first glance, defeating such an opponent seemed quite realistic. But they had no idea what power the one they were about to deal with had. In the morning, everyone gathered at the gate, ready to set off to a new hunting ground. But then Raiden noticed a black van that looked surprisingly suspicious. He quickly got into the car with the others, trying not to lose his vigilance. The van began to follow, not trying to hide and keeping a safe distance. This only confirmed the suspicions that they were being watched, and that something was being prepared in the shadows. At first they went to the dungeon, where at that time Josh was already with his own task. During another battle, the hero suddenly felt someone's unfamiliar presence, which caused alarm. Without wasting any time, they decided to move deeper into the labyrinth to check the situation on the spot. Soon, several players removed their disguises, and it became obvious that they did not plan to hide for long. Their armor looked cheap, but their confidence in their abilities was evident in every movement they made. One of the strangers spoke up, and it became clear that they were not part of the Japanese groups. The hero voiced his assumption, which unexpectedly provoked the anger of the leader of this group. At that very moment, the opponents attacked first, starting a rapid fight without hesitation. Raiden and Louise immediately took up fighting positions, preparing to repel the enemy onslaught. But suddenly, Josh was the first to rush forward. Without thinking for a second about the consequences, he acted decisively, destroying enemies one after another, demonstrating a rapid growth in strength. Raiden and Louise merely watched the fight, not interfering unless necessary. The leader of the opponents decided to take advantage of the situation and secretly approached Louise. He tried to take her by surprise, hoping for the effect of surprise and a quick victory. But the woman sensed the presence ahead of time, parried the blow, and launched an immediate counterattack. In a matter of seconds, she forced her opponent to his knees, stunning everyone around him. The entire team's gaze focused on her, not believing what had happened so quickly and easily. Taking advantage of the moment, Raiden entered the battle and began to destroy the remnants of the enemy group. He acted decisively, without the slightest regret, leaving no chance for his opponents to escape. After the battle, all the prisoners were gathered in one place for subsequent interrogation. The hero used psychometry to discover the truth hidden behind words and faces. The memories revealed a terrible reality. This guild was engaged in illegal trading of players. This information caused real anger in Raiden, and he made an instant, serious decision. All members of this group were executed without hesitation, so that they would never harm anyone again. Meanwhile, in the Dark Guild, its leader was pondering his last task before retiring. He hoped that completing this task would be the impetus for restoring their power. One of the members of the Dark Guild received a new order from the leader of the organization himself. His target was officially Louise, who had been attracting more and more attention from the guild lately. Returning to his allies, he told everything he had learned recently about the woman. He also shared his guesses regarding the mysterious level 20 limitation. Among the mentioned were rumors about the disappearance of the previous team working on the same task. Although his story seemed convincing, the rest of the team reacted with obvious wariness. Most of them did not believe that the new enemies had evolved so quickly and become a threat. They believed that someone was exaggerating, since such rapid growth could not be natural. Despite their doubts, they began to prepare for the worst-case scenario, considering their options. Everyone was waiting for final confirmation from intelligence, which would decide the moment of their exit. At this time, Raiden remained alone in his own room, immersed in his own sluggish thoughts. He had the feeling that progress had slowed, and new achievements had become rare. Even trading, which had previously brought in stable profits, suddenly faced restrictions. His thoughts were interrupted by his mother, who called everyone to the table offering to have dinner together. The whole family gathered in the kitchen, and Louise had already joined in, becoming a part of it. While they were eating, the two women's attention was drawn to the television, where a popular TV series was being broadcast. Their hobby became a topic of conversation because television dramas were the mother's only hobby. Raiden watched the conversation, wondering how much movies could influence emotions. He thought about how even in difficult times, simple things can bring a sense of peace and joy. After dinner, he decided to continue the discussion by turning to Louise. He was genuinely interested in her opinion of contemporary cinema, especially given her background. The woman responded with admiration, because she had never seen anything like it in her life. Her reaction gave the hero the idea that these materials could have commercial potential. He realized that films and TV series could be turned into a new, unique product for trade. The next morning, a woman from another world received a message informing her of a new category of goods appearing in the store. She hesitated for a few minutes, doubting the wisdom of buying a TV set along with a video player. But then, I decided to place an order, although I was a little unsure until the very end. After delivery, the woman immediately turned on the first available film and began to watch it carefully. The film, called Transformers, captivated her so much that she even forgot about her evening's business. Her face glowed with joy, and her gaze became more focused and admiring with each passing minute. At the same time, Raiden received a notification about a purchase that had just been made through his digital platform. In addition, the system also sent a comment asking to add a work named Bumblebee to the catalog. This surprised the hero, because such a character was part of the film and could not be put up for sale. However, he began to think about how he could get out of the situation without losing the trust of potential clients. After some thought, he turned to Louise to hear her solution to this dilemma. Without thinking twice, she suggested creating a series of figurines that could change shape, like in the film. Raiden immediately approved of the idea, realizing that it opened up a new direction for his product line. Within a few days, sales began to grow steadily, increasing his profits almost every hour. Finally, The moment came when he had collected enough funds to afford to buy an important elixir. It was a special remedy created to treat complex diseases, which he had been looking for his father for a long time. Without wasting any time, he immediately went to the hospital, taking with him a bottle with the healing contents. Approaching the bed, he carefully opened the bottle and poured a few drops of the medicine into his father's mouth. The feeling of duty fulfilled filled his heart with a warmth he had not felt for a long time. In the evening, having already returned to the store, the hero decided to spend some time studying the updated catalog. Among the many positions, his gaze stopped on one very rare and mysterious object. It was about the Thunderer, a divine-class artifact that had remained blocked to him until now. Its price was not reflected, but it was noted that one needed to accumulate a quadrillion points to purchase it. Understanding the complexity of this goal, he decided to choose something simpler, but still useful, for now. As a result, he acquired an elixir that increased the strength indicator by 1, making the owner somewhat stronger. The next morning, the family was called to the hospital, where doctors reported good news about the father's condition improving. Everyone was happy to hear this, because for a long time the treatment had not given the expected results. And finally, there was hope. The hero felt peace in his heart, realizing that his efforts were not in vain, and that the help really worked. Meanwhile, in a cramped room in one of the apartments of the Dark Guild, a group of players were gathering for a meeting. As they discussed their next steps, they argued about the need to remain in the shadows and avoid conflict. Some were already striving for an open confrontation, wanting to stop hiding and begin active actions. However, the commander remained cautious, explaining the complexity of the situation and emphasizing the danger. The team members reluctantly agreed, but soon began to whisper behind his back. They spread rumors about the leader, as if he was a hero of Osaka and had a questionable past. The conversations included rumors of crimes, including violence and the alleged murder of a minor. Meanwhile, the hero and his companion continued to fight in the dungeon, destroying monsters. After another battle, they rested, talking about the equipment that Louise wore. But suddenly, the hero felt the approach of several players who quickly surrounded their position. After exchanging brief words, they realized that their opponents had a specific plan of attack. Without wasting any time, Raiden and Louise launched a counterattack, moving quickly and silently in the shadows. They methodically sought out enemies, destroying them one by one with extraordinary precision and force. The enemy commander, sensing Louise's approach, ordered everyone to gather together at a certain point. But the hero took advantage of the moment. He appeared from behind, struck the first blow, and broke their formation. Louise did not stand aside. Her attacks were no less brutal. She instantly neutralized others. After the battle ended, Raiden grabbed the commander by the shoulder, preventing him from escaping the scene. Louise gathered the surviving enemies in one place, along with all their personal belongings. The hero activated his psychometry skill, trying to find out the origin and motive of the attack. The vision confirmed his suspicions. The players were from Japan, likely part of a dark organization. Raiden did not hold back his emotions, clearly stating that any refusal to cooperate would result in death. To prevent them from lying or evading the truth, he used the truth contract, establishing control. The hero began to question the enemies before moving on to the main thing, the number of their allies in the region. The commander did not resist, answered calmly, without the slightest intention to hide or distort the truth. He explained that Raiden's identity was known only to the Gate Minister and a limited circle of his supporters. The protagonist's gaze fell on the pendant that had previously hung around the man's neck, where there was a photo of a young dark-haired girl. He instantly guessed that the reason for Baxter's fear was his daughter, for whose sake he was trying to survive. Raiden activated psychometry and saw before him the image of a girl lying in a hospital bed. Then the hero decided to find out more, so he asked to briefly tell about his past life and path. The commander, named Baxter, sighed and began by saying that he had once been an ordinary soldier in his country's army. While on another mission, something unusual happened. He suddenly awakened hidden powers within himself. After that, he was immediately recruited by a guild that monitored awakening and combat skills. He had to follow orders and protect civilians, performing difficult and risky tasks. One day, about 5 years ago, he found himself in Osaka, where new portals had opened. At this time, the city was attacked by monsters that burst out en masse, bringing death and destruction. In a fierce battle, he met with the king of the orcs, fought with him for a long time until he won. His actions quickly spread through the press, and Baxter began to be called nothing less than the hero of Osaka. But behind the glorious title, there was a tragedy. His daughter was diagnosed with a fatal illness. Doctors have discovered a rare disease, Lie block, for which there was no cure yet. Since then, she has been in hospital where doctors could only keep her feeble life alive. The father worked every day, got into debt, and was unable to even regularly buy his daughter ice cream. One day, the minister of the gate approached him, offering support in exchange for loyalty. Left with no choice, Baxter accepted the deal, agreeing to serve for the sake of one loved one. The story struck a chord with Raiden, causing him to remember the rare mana neutralizer. He asked if Baxter would ever be able to raise his hand against the people of the Gate Department if necessary. After this, Raiden looked at the warrior's stats window, and the results were truly astonishing. Without hesitation, the hero took out a scroll of soul contract from the catalog, an agreement that binds the destinies of both parties. According to the terms of the agreement, breaking the contract meant death for both, with no chance of escape. But he also promised, if Baxter was faithful, Raiden would find a way to cure his child. Without a second's hesitation, he agreed and signed the document, placing his hand on the contract sheet. The crew members also begged for mercy, pleading for a chance to save their own lives. However, the hero saw in a vision how they mocked the defenseless, mercilessly killing women. Feeling angry, he did not hesitate. He cold-bloodedly cut off the heads of everyone who asked for mercy. Raiden handed over a small bottle of medicine and ordered him to return to Japan, reporting the mission's failure. He also ordered the elimination of anyone who was in any way involved in information about him or his entourage. The hero understood that this was a morally difficult task and anticipated the internal resistance in Baxter's soul. So I decided not to put too much pressure on him, but offered to join him and explained everything. After a short conversation, Baxter agreed to the terms and then sent a report to the minister through a closed channel. In the message, he noted that the association's intervention had thwarted the plan, and he would say more upon his return. After this, Baxter took action. He gathered everyone who had information about Raiden under the guise of a meeting. Under the lonely sky, without a doubt, he eliminated everyone, washing away the blood with his duty to his daughter. Several days passed, and the news reported the suicide of the minister and his subordinates. Meanwhile, Raiden and Louise were preparing for another trip into the dungeon, focused on the task at hand. Suddenly, the phone rang. The hero's mother anxiously reported that something unexpected had happened. Without delay, they dropped everything and immediately went to the hospital, where they arrived half an hour later. There, in the White Room, Carl, the hero's father, sat on the bed, miraculously coming to his senses after a long sleep. He could not yet speak, but with an effort of will he raised his hand and slowly pointed his finger at his son. The air thickened with energy for a moment. A clear wave of magic could be felt that made even Louise wary. She immediately defended herself, but then asked Carl to show the status window for a more detailed analysis. What they saw surprised Raiden. His father was awake, and the energy in him was growing with each passing hour. A week passed, and Carl could not only speak independently, but also walk a little, leaning on his hand. The mother expressed her intention to go out for a short while to get some fresh air, but her son assured her to stay home. He said that he would stay in the room with her father overnight, so that she could finally rest peacefully. When she finally left the room, there was a silence in the air filled with gratitude and warmth. The father was finally able to thank his son for the miracle, sincerely admitting that he remembered the moment with the medications. The man did not ask about the source of the medicine because he felt that it was a secret that should not be revealed. He simply thanked his son for saving him and then shared his intention to return to real combat. Carl stated that he wanted to hunt in the dungeon as soon as he fully recovered and got back on his feet after his illness. Raiden felt a thrill, knowing how dangerous this activity could be even for an experienced player. But my father was adamant that at 57 it was time to prove himself and be useful again. It didn't matter to him that his son could provide for everyone. He wanted to take care of the family on his own. His wife supported his decision, believing that will and desire are already half the achievement. A few days later, Raiden and Louise were sitting in a cafe, calmly discussing this difficult issue for both of them. The woman supported Carl, considering awakening a gift that should not be wasted. Players save people, and when trouble comes, only they can stop the cruel monsters. Raiden acknowledged the truth in her words, but he couldn't ignore the fear that lived in his heart. He had seen the brutal battles that took lives, and he did not wish such a risk on the person closest to him. Louise advised that instead of refusing, it would be better to give her father's tools for self-defense. He already knows about elixirs, so if you trust him with even more, the result will be much stronger. If Carl becomes powerful enough, there will no longer be a need to constantly take care of him. Raiden decided to approach this differently and prepared himself for a serious conversation with his father. Arriving at the hospital, he no longer tried to convince Carl, but proposed an alliance. The husband accepted the invitation, and a glow appeared on their bodies for a moment, confirming the contract. After this, Raiden revealed the main secret. He is not an ordinary player and has special abilities. He handed his father the Power Stone, which greatly strengthened his body, awakening new potential. He explained that this was a valuable thing, accessible only to him, and that such items simply did not exist for others. Therefore, everything that happens between them must remain a complete secret from the rest of the family. They sat down at the table and Raiden explained how to use the crystals and skill books. Only after this will Carl be eligible to participate in the hunt with the support team provided. He asked in surprise whether such things could be given to ordinary people, because he felt younger. He remembered his wife and wanted to give her one of the stones so that she too could feel the changes. However, Raiden immediately refused. All this is very important and should not fall into the wrong hands. Father nodded with understanding and remembered that before going into the dungeon, he needed to undergo training. He didn't even immediately remember about the Players' Academy because impatience took over him completely. Sometime later, the official residents of the Japanese government learned of the suicide of the Gate Minister. Officials did not believe in such an end, suspecting a deliberate murder on the part of one of his close associates. The search for the traitor yielded no results, so the irritated Prime Minister ordered increased security. He learned who exactly was running the agents and quickly turned to Baxter, whom he considered reliable, who, without delay, contacted Raiden and reported the Prime Minister's order. He said that they should receive charges of corruption prepared by one of the internal factions. Raiden advised to follow directions, gain trust, and remain as cautious as possible. He also learned that thanks to the medication, Baxter's daughter was getting better and was beginning to recover. However, the man planned for the girl to move to her mother in America and live in safety. Her treatment had to be kept secret, so as not to draw unnecessary attention to the situation. Raiden stressed that he shouldn't keep calling unless it's something that concerns him personally. It was agreed that Baxter would act independently and would only contact us in truly critical moments. After this, their conversation ended on a positive note, leaving an impression of trust. Meanwhile, one of the Korean players went to train in the dungeon to level up. He was a member of the association, so every hunt was another way for him to improve. After destroying several familiar orcs, he decided to take a break to restore his strength and magic. However, suddenly, new gates opened nearby, from which stronger versions of the same orcs emerged. Without wasting any time, he tried to attack, but the Orc King killed him in just a few moments. The other players nearby couldn't believe it, because it was just an ordinary orc monster. They entered the battle but did not last even a minute. The orc dealt with them with lightning speed. More players joined the battle, hoping to at least hold back the enemy's onslaught a little. But even the new forces could not stop the offensive. Everyone was killed in a matter of seconds. After this, the orcs calmly moved towards the exit, scattering bodies along the way and destroying everything around. The city's residents, seized with panic, ran in all directions, not understanding what was happening around them. It was impossible to fight the monsters because they carried something unnaturally strong within them. Panic began to spread throughout the city, leaving behind chaos and despair among the common population. Meanwhile, Raiden and Louise were leaving the dark underground labyrinth, having just completed another dangerous mission. At the exit, they were met with a missed call from the association, but their attempt to call back was unsuccessful. Although contact was not possible, Louise realized almost immediately that the problem was related to a new wave of monsters. These creatures were different from the previous ones. They acted in a coordinated manner and had a higher level of strength. The group of orcs that the players encountered looked threatening even to experienced fighters. Louise shared her assumptions. Monsters are probably capable of gradual development. In her opinion, orcs are most similar to humans, especially among the non-combat, simpler representatives. Common orcs are just the basis, but exceptional soldier individuals can be born among them. Soldiers are of rare level, which means that there may be even stronger ones, possibly even heroic rank. And where there are heroic ones, there will certainly be a leader who may well belong to the legendary class. While they were discussing this theory, soldiers, tanks, and military equipment had already arrived in the area. The shelling began immediately, in an attempt to contain the invasion and protect residents from hostile creatures. The players gathered at the site fought hard, holding the line and not allowing a breakthrough. They won small victories, although each of them cost incredible efforts and losses. Raiden soon appeared, analyzed the situation, and felt a momentary relief. At first glance, the players had the advantage, and victory seemed achievable in the near future. But everything changed when a menacing roar was heard over the horizon, causing everyone to freeze in place. It was the Orc King, a huge creature whose voice paralyzed most of the warriors. Only Raiden remained unharmed by the magic, standing among the motionless players who were defenseless. The monsters began to mercilessly exterminate the paralyzed, giving no chance for escape or protection. Players who managed to resist the influence of the magic joined Raiden in an attempt to fight back. Together they attacked, working in unison, trying to somehow stop the enemy. However, the blows did no harm, and each attempt only aggravated the situation around. The pressure from the enemy grew, and finally, the players decided to retreat temporarily to regroup. Raiden attempted to activate the teleportation spell, but the spell was blocked by an invisible force. It turned out that the source of this magic was the leader of a legendary level building hiding on the roof. It was difficult to concentrate in the growing chaos, but the hero clearly understood that the real battle was just beginning. While most had already given up hope, there was a fire of determination burning inside Raiden that would not allow him to give up.